Here we are. We did it. We're streaming. Hello. How are you? Good to see you. Glad you're here. For those of you who are just listening in, perhaps on a podcast, what I am doing here is live streaming on YouTube. I live stream 6 to 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Though the comments that I'm reading, the people I am discussing with, are coming in on YouTube and Twitch. If you would like to participate, head over to www.thecanadiancommie.com. It'll take you right into the chat. You can join into the conversation. You can ask questions, make concerns heard, as long as you're polite and respectful. And hey, not a Nazi. We're super glad to have you. Already, Peanut Butter Beatrice in the chat, lovely to see you. I had to miss yesterday's stream because life is a thing. Did you know that? Did you know that life is an ongoing, unfolding thing and that things will just happen? Gabriel, good to see you. Woke CIA drone pilot over on Twitch. The Canadian commie is rising. One hopes. One hopes. If you would like the Canadian commie to continue rising, please be sure to like, share, subscribe. Perhaps even consider donating to the Patreon, www.patreon.com/thecanadiancommie. And hey, the number one thing that you can do if you would like to help all things spread into the world, you can tell people I exist. Right? You got a friend who's like, oh, I like listening to podcasts. I'm getting a little soft on Mr. Rogan because his last comedy special kind of sucked. Well, let him know about me. Like, oh, every commenter I seem to listen to who pretends to be a leftist ends up being like a far-right stooge. Well, send him to me. Yeah, this Vosh guy, he was fun at first, but then I realized he was a pedophile. Okay. Send him on down. I used to like Hassan, but now that he's super rich, his takes are kind of like super rich guy takes. Come on down. The story that we will start with today is, of course, Kamala Harris's ascension into the top ranks of the Democratic Party. The strategy that they have taken is a good strategy, right? The weird strategy. We've all heard about it by now, I'm sure. The goal of the Harris administration, or the goal of the Harris campaign, rather, is how do we make genocide wholesome? How do we make people forget that the Democrats are just as equally a bloodthirsty, psychopathic group of narcissistic corporatists? How do we make people forget that and start to embrace the idea of quote-unquote normalcy, right? That if the accusation of the opposition is that they are strange, odd, unusual, or weird, then the inference, right, the implication, the idea is that, oh, if they're weird, we're normal, right? So the Republicans are weird, the Democrats are normal. So that means genocide is normal. Increasing the police budget is normal. Campaigning to the right of the Republicans on most issues is normal, right? Pointing at something like Project 2025 and being like, that's weird, implies that what the Democrats are doing is normal, when, guess what? It's not normal at all. It's absolutely not normal, even a tiny little bit. The Democrats are just as rapacious and psychopathic. They're just a little bit better about putting a smiling face on it. Like the bar is so low now. The bar is so pathetically low. The bar is so sadly low that Democrats are just happy that there's a person leading their party who's capable of stringing together sentences. Like that's it. They're just happy that they have a leader who isn't going to stand in front of the nation and be like, we like to hear in America that America is the greatest country in America. Like, they're just happy that they've got somebody who will be like, we stand for American values. God bless America. And as long as she says it with her chest, as long as she says it with that Oprah energy of like, you get a sustainable system. You get a sustainable system. People don't actually care. Like, the performative, what this is showing and proving and should really prove to everybody is that liberals don't actually care about anything. They have no principles. They are as darkly fascist as the Republicans are. They just don't want to look bad, right? They're like the screaming Karen mother who screams at their child every single day and then is confused when that child grows up to despise them, right? That's the type of person that we're talking about in the Democratic Party. We're talking about the type of person who gets their hair cut with that sharp angle, right? And is very fussy and demands respect, right? Not because they've done anything to earn it, but because they put on a performance of being a good citizen, right? It's the performative aspect that matters exclusively to the Democrats. And that's extremely obvious, that they don't actually care about the genocides that they're creating. They don't actually care about the war on terror. They don't actually care about the decline of Western civilization. They don't actually care about the poverty that the Democratic Party creates. They don't actually care about the corporate takeover of America. They don't care about the military-industrial complex. They don't care about the income inequality. They don't care about any of that. They just want to look statesmanly. That's the only thing they care about exclusively, no exceptions whatsoever. Bernie Sanders, AOC, from the top to the bottom. If you are in the Democratic Party, it is because you are a performer and nothing else. They are to politics as the WWE is to wrestling, right? Technically, I guess they are doing it, right? They're picking somebody up and putting them down, all right. Yep, and there's bumps that happen, but it's all sort of performative. It's not actual politics. Like, when Nicolas Maduro and Elon Musk challenge each other to a fight, that's real politics. That's closer to real politics than anything that happens in the electoral system, right? Because that's an actual leader of an actual country, Nicolas Maduro, right? Challenging an extreme wealth holder, one of the capitalists in America, to a fight. I'd pay to see it. I'd pay to see it. So, and this performativeness is spreading into the VP selection, right? What's his name? Tim Walz? Yeah, Tim Walz, Governor Tim Walz. A selection that is obviously done because they're trying to make the Democratic Party look wholesome. They're trying to make genocide look wholesome. They're trying to make their narcissistic, psychopathic, corporatist death cult look wholesome. And a guy like Tim Walz actually did pass a piece of legislation in his home state of Minnesota where he was like, hey, kids in school should have school lunches, right? You know, the most basic human, lowest possible bar that could possibly exist. Should children eat or not, right? And Tim Walz said, you know what? I think that children should eat. I think that's a good idea for children to have food. And the Democratic Party is acting like this guy is Jesus Christ himself, that he came from on high, and that he's like, look, we have a black female presidential candidate who is capable of saying a series of words in a row that make a full sentence. And her vice presidential candidate passed one piece of legislation one time that wasn't overtly in service of the psychopathic death cult of corporatist Power! Look at us! We're so normal! Look how normal we are! Isn't this the most normal thing you've ever seen in the world? And then they point over to, like, the slavish, like, worm tongue, like, well, we need to see our children's genitals. Yes, we need to ensure that there's a dress code enforced in the state, as well as ensuring that every child that plays in any sport, we need to see their genitals. Yes, we do. And they're saying, look at how weird they are. And everybody's going, I guess comparatively speaking, compared to, like, literally guys who are like, Jesus Christ is coming back and he's going to save us all from the Muslim hordes. We need to send the Muslims back to their homeland. Praise Jesus. Compared to that, I suppose that the Democrats have the veneer of normalcy, have sort of the pretend version of normalcy. But when you actually, like, compare the average Democrat to, like, any person in your life, you're like, oh, you guys are still a pack of fucking weirdos. You still work for corporate power. You still don't give a fuck about climate change. You obviously love genocide, torture, and war. Your previous leadership is friends with people like Jeffrey Epstein. Like, it's not a choice. You understand? Like, really, it's like, it's as if the election is between Wormtongue and Sauron, and we're being told that, well, you don't want to pick Wormtongue. Look at what a weirdo he is. You know, he's there being, oh yes, we need to make secure the power of the throne. And then Sauron at least looks statesmanly, but they both work for Sauron. They're both in the thrall of the Dark Lord. And you're being told that this is somehow a legitimate choice. Fuck off. Like, fuck off. There's a reason the society is collapsing. There's a reason the society is in decline. There's a reason for it, and it's because of the sustained efforts of the alliance between the Democrats and the Republicans. It's because J.D. Vance, Tim Walz, Kamala Harris, and Donald Trump are friends. They go to the same country clubs. They go to the same establishments. They drink the same wine. They organize with the same people. They talk to the same CIA agents. They talk to the same director of the CIA. They talk to the same director of the FBI. They talk to the same generals and the same people who are actually in charge of the country, right? That when the cameras turn off, they shake each other's hands. And, like, give each other little pats on the butt and little kisses on the cheek. Because they like each other. They're all, well, maybe they don't like each other, but they're all friends. They're in the same class, and you're not part of that class. Right? So this just obvious scam that we're all collectively falling for, maybe don't. Maybe don't. Like, maybe don't fall for the scam. Because it's clearly a scam. Eggs D, good to see you, my man. Exhale, always a pleasure. Jib Jabby, a pleasure, my man. Matthias, Kevin, Nilo, Conton, good to see each and every one of you guys. Woke CIA drone pilot writes, I can't wait to vote for the Karen that jailed nonviolent weed smokers and parents for their kids skipping school when she was Attorney General in California. Look, here's a nice old guy for VP. Can we have a little genocide of 2 million people, please? You're wrong, John. Genocide is a normal part of America and baked in from day one. That's true. That is actually true. It's like, why should we pay attention to the history of settler colonialism? It happened so long ago. So long ago we did the settler genocide, the settler colonialism. It happened so... How could it possibly? In today's modern world, how could America's history of settler colonialism have anything to do with anything that we're doing in the world? Well, you know, if you study the history of settler colonialism, you'll recognize it when you see it, right? And you'll be like, huh, it looks like the West is doing that thing it's always done. Looks like if you actually decompact and deconstruct the history of America, you can be like, oh, it's always done this. This is new. This isn't new. This isn't like a new thing. right? And if you can show its history of settler colonialism, then it's really easy to convince people that, like, yeah, and they're just still doing it, right? They're just still doing settler colonialism. They just turned it, and after they ethnically cleansed the First Nations people, after they secured control of their own settler colonial project, they then turned around and exported that settler colonial project to the Middle East. That's all. It's always been this way. It's the same project. It's the same idea. That's why it's important to know about settler colonialism. Walk out, walk, 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 walk. History matters. Dragon Fruit, good to see you. The vice presidential candidate for the Democratic Party is the governor of the state I live in. He has done a lot of good things for the state of Minnesota. Yeah, I think that's actually true, Dragon Fruit. When I take a look at the guy's record, like any leader, he's got, like, the pros and the cons, right? He's still a Zionist. He still has given corporations handouts and things like this. Okay, right? And of course the Democratic Party is going to take a look at the, like, exclusively positive things. Like giving children school lunches, yeah, objectively good, right? Definitely a step up from where the Democrats even were in one election cycle, right? They've managed to find the one guy who's done one good thing in their party and pull him up to the vice presidential candidacy and to the standard. Okay, cool, right? But we all know they're doing it to justify a war in the Middle East. We all know that what they're doing is they're trying to secure power so that they can still maintain this genocide, right? So that they can maintain the status quo, so they can maintain what they're doing. So in many ways, it's actually, like, very dark what they're doing. They're, like, holding children's lunches over you and saying, look at the one good. It's like when a corporation says, we donated $1 million to cancer research. Aren't we wonderful? It's that philanthropic, like, but Bill Gates gives so much money to charities. Bill Gates is what a beautiful, benevolent man that he is, giving money to people, right? It's part of the scam. It's part of the grift, right? That, like, the game is do the barest possible minimum that you think you can get away with in order to maintain power. Like, this is actually why the New Deal happened. Right? That the New Deal happens because millions and millions and millions of people stood outside the White House calling for a revolution, saying out loud, hey, we could just do away with you. What are we even tolerating you for? You do nothing for us. You're obviously pathetic, psychopathic losers. We could just walk in there and take this whole thing over. Why do we need you? And so they started going, you need us because we are going to do Social Security. Yeah. Yeah, and you need us because a federal minimum wage. Yeah, federal minimum wage. Yeah, don't overthrow us. Right? Doesn't suddenly make them good. Right? It just means that they understand that, if we're going to actually take power and maintain power, we do actually have to govern. Right? We do actually have to give, like, that 0.25% reform over 50 years. We actually at least have to maintain the barest possible minimum of the expectations of what a civilization should look like, right? Like, and so here comes Tim Walz, right? Here comes the governor of Minnesota doing what all politicians in all history and time have always done, which is, I'll do a 0.25% reform over 50 years, right? I'll give some kind of piecemeal reformism here. I'll give this over here. But because he's doing that in an environment of people who are literally, like, their primary core ideology is genuinely slash everything to the floor and abandon the populace fully, he looks like Jesus Christ, right? That if this guy was operating in a sane political environment, if this guy was operating in a political environment where everybody was like, yeah, you give, like, small, tiny little piecemeal reform concessions to the populace to garner their respect and trust in order to gain status and then hopefully get them to vote for you so that you ascend to the position of power. So you become the governor, right? And you try to find the smallest possible cell that you can sell to the widest possible base, so that everybody goes, well, I guess I'll vote for that guy. He's going to give me $10, right? And you want to make sure that the offer is so small that your corporate owners will be like, yeah, okay, right? That it doesn't matter to them really. Okay. And it's gotten especially bad in America because the other side of the coin, the Republicans, are literally like, the base is literally like, why am I paying for school children's lunches? They should go get a job at grade 9. Like, so it's not hard to look like a saint by doing practically nothing. Like, oh, school lunches for kids. Oh, the guy's Jesus Christ. Okay, cool. Like, I'm just not impressed even a little bit. And I know for a fact that this guy is being used in the most cynical way possible, right? He's being used for the most cynical way possible because they need a guy like him to stand in front of the country and say all of these nice things and all of this good stuff so that they can continue to enact a genocide. And Transylvanian is essentially nailing it. Tim Walz is a genocidal Zionist psychopath who's advocated for schools to indoctrinate children into Zionism. The entire Democratic Party is owned by AIPAC, and so are the Republicans, of course. It's just like, it is the good cop, bad cop dynamic. It is the good cop, bad cop dynamic. And as the game gets weirder and stranger and more peculiar and more entrenched, the good cop needs to get gooder and the bad cop needs to get badder, right? Like, the bad cop needs to get more fascist, needs to get more threatening, bigger gleaming red eyes, more anger, more frustration, more threats, more coup attempts, more violence. It just needs to ramp up more and more and more obviously white supremacist, more obviously fascist, just bigger, more. And the good cop needs to get good, needs to be better, right? Needs to offer more, needs to actually put forward more in order to keep people actually engaged in the alliance. Because the actual solution for Americans is to wholesale, completely, and total abandon the Democrats and the Republicans completely. Literally not a single vote. That's how, like, if the election showed up and everybody just dogpiled independent candidates and everybody just dogpiled and, like, literally the turnout rate was 5% or something, like, if straight out the people of America abandoned this game of just, what are you even fucking talking about? This is obviously horseshit. Like, it's so obviously a rigged game created by two parties, by, like, obviously psychopathic billionaires are playing a game of electoral politics, and we're all supposed to believe it's real, right? We're all just supposed to buy into the idea of its reality when it's obviously the phoniest shit you've ever seen of your life, right? They're all actors. It's all bullshit. And and if everybody showed up and if on every single ticket they were like third party, and if everybody just dumped over to that, all of this would disappear. It would just be like completely gone, just, right? And so the only way to keep people on board in this psychotic game of ridiculousness is either round up the white supremacists and create a white supremacy ticket, or actually offer something and actually say, like, yeah, school lunches. Does that get your vote? Is that enough? Yeah, I guess we'll, I don't know, increase the federal minimum wage to $8 from $7.50, where it's been for the last 50 years. Does that get your vote? Oh, okay, that's not getting your vote. You're not impressed by that. What if we gave $1 million to... What if we acknowledged that climate change was real? Is that... Oh, you actually want us to do something about it. What if we gave $1 billion to climate change companies that end up just being a way for corporations to launder their money. Does that get your vote? Man, you guys are tough. What, you actually want us to improve the quality of your life? Right, that's basically where we're at right now. It really is like you're walking up to like Jason Voorhees and Hannibal Lecter and saying to them, okay, one of you guys needs to play the role of the psychopath, and the other one of you needs to actually come up with a plan to offer something good for the American people that juxtaposes that. And that somehow it's ended up being Jason Voorhees who has the task of coming up with the good idea. And all of his ideas are like, I will not kill puppies. And you're like, cool, you should be doing that anyway, right? Like, it's like that kind of level. So I'm just completely unimpressed by these guys. The show, I will say this. I will concede this point along this Kamala Harris line. That the show that the Democrats are putting on is a good show. It's a good strategy. The weird strategy is a good strategy. It pivots the discourse. It creates a line of attack against their quote-unquote opponent that the Republicans don't really have a good response against. Because the truth is that we all know the Republicans are fucking weirdos. Like, come on. They're led by Donald Trump. Of course they're a bunch of fucking weirdos, right? Like, red state culture is kind of a weird culture. It doesn't exist like anywhere else in the world. It's just this very strange amalgamation of like suffering the worst under the system of capitalist America while simultaneously glorifying it. Like the cowboy hat with the 2 ARs, somehow smoking a cigar and eating a cheeseburger at the same time, like bare chest ammo belts across the chest, big American flag in the background, riding an eagle, with like the Statue of Liberty like shooting an Al-Qaeda member or something, right? Like that's like red state quote unquote culture. Oh yeah, and also being like, I love Jesus, even though you've never read a single thing he said and you certainly don't abide by anything he says. Like it's this incoherent, full of itself, overconfident, and confident for no goddamn reason at all. Like all these Texans being like, America's the greatest country in the world. Shut up. Like, shut up. You guys look like clowns. It's obvious that you look like clowns. It's gotten so obvious that you look like clowns that the Democrats are able to just be like, hey, these guys look like clowns, eh? And everybody goes like, yeah, isn't that right? And it looks like that's what they're going to win the election on. That they're basically going to win the election on everybody coming together collectively to at least state out loud, these red state guys are lunatics, right? Like they look like clowns, right? Like we all agree on that, at least, right? And everybody's going to go like, yeah, like, yeah, I agree with that. Like the Democrats actually managed to find a majority position that everybody can get on board with, because if these elections are going to be exclusively cultural, if they're not going to have anything to do with your material conditions, if they're not about improving the quality of your life, then at least they should be about making cultural statements about the country that you live in. And if the Democrats can put forward a strong incentive for people to come together and reject this red state culture, this lunatic, absolute insane culture that is unhinged, has lost its mind completely, then maybe that's all they need to do, right? Just give people a cathartic outlet, just a way to vent, to just say, hey, I don't think that the way that you are acting, red states, is at all appropriate, and certainly not good enough to govern. Certainly unconvincing. Doesn't make the rest of us feel comfortable. We're not sitting here being like, yeah, yeehaw, right? Woohoo. Can't wait to get in my World War II sized truck, do donuts in the parking lot while shooting fireworks out the back and calling that a fun day, while then driving my kids down to the swine farm so we can roll around with the pigs in the mud. Like, yee-haw. How about yee-nah? Right? And so I think that that's the direction that this whole thing is taking. That it's going to be Kamala, and it's going to be Kamala just because the Democrats are creating a cultural moment. Very similarly to how Obama created a cultural moment, first black president, right? He creates this cultural moment. Well, Kamala Harris and Tim Walz are going to make a cultural moment. And that cultural moment isn't first woman black president. I'm sure that they will play this card, but that's not the angle that they're going to go for. They're going to go for the angle of reject these weirdos and give people a moment of cultural catharsis so that everybody can actually look at one another and say, yeah, this isn't okay. Just how, like, Stephanie Meyer gave a bunch of middle-aged housewives from the Midwest permission to look at each other and say, bondage is fine, right? Like, that's just a cultural touchstone. Everybody, that's 50 Shades of Grey basically told the entire Western world, yeah, if you want to get tied up in bed, that's cool. Like, we don't judge that. That's cool, right? Normal. Well, same thing. Now all of these same Midwestern housewives get to come together and say, yeah, these guys are weirdos. And that's it. That's all this election is going to be. It's not going to be about anything else. It's not going to be about the genocide in Gaza. It's not going to be about the war. It's not going to be about any of that. No one is going to even mention it. It's not even going to be part of the debates. They're not even going to talk about it. It's literally just going to be like, look how creepy and weird these guys are. And, incidentally, they are creepy and weird. Because that's their job. They're supposed to look creepy and weird so that the Democrats can look at them and say, look how creepy and weird they are. Because they're an alliance. Because they're a team. What a weird time to be alive, man. What a strange time. I just feel like I've seen it over and over and over again. The reason why I hit on this point, you guys, when you tune in, you get like a half hour of me talking about the alliance, right? And the reason why I do that, the reason why I hit on that, is because when I'm out in the world, I see a bunch of people who I think and thought were intelligent, smart people, who, when Biden was in power, we're really talking a game of just like, fuck these Democrats, and like the Republicans are not that much different, and like they seem to be same, and they were like literally rubbing right up against it. And now that Kamala's the choice, all of these people have put the coconut on their head. They're all just like, coconut on the head, Democrat, 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 and they've just completely forgotten that these two parties are allies, that they work together to attain goals together. It's just wild. And yeah, Trump still does have a decent shot. Like, it's not a shoo-in. I just do think that this is a new tactic, an electoral strategy that I think has truck. I think it's a good strategy. Like, I think a big reason why I think it's a good strategy is because it's a step down from the, like, Hillary Clinton-esque deplorable people. You know what I mean? Like, it's still in that wheelhouse, but it isn't like I'm the sunshiny, glorious person on the hill. Like, calling these Republicans weirdos is a position of the everyman. It's a position that you could hear Al Bundy say. It's something you could hear Homer Simpson say, right? That's its strength. That's its strength, is that it doesn't talk down to regular people. It is the position of regular people. The regular people are looking at these Republicans and just being like, yeah, what a bunch of fucking weirdos, right? That's odd, strange, right? There's a lot of that going around. But you are right. It could still go the Republican way. I think a lot of it's going to come down to the debate, frankly. Transylvanian writes, the deep state regularly rigs elections in quote-unquote third world countries, and when that fails, they just refuse to acknowledge the results. Why does anyone think they act differently inside the U.S.? Yeah. for God's sakes, the recent election that they're having in Venezuela, or they had in Venezuela rather, where Maduro won by about 10%, the United States is saying that no, it's the other guy. It's like literally just another Juan Guaido moment, just straight up, just like the same exact strategy of just like Juan Guaido loses an election against Maduro. The United States says, no, Juan Guaido actually won. And the entire rest of the world goes, okay, bud. And then it becomes like the butt of every single, like every time there's any political activity that happens anywhere in the world, there's a segment of the internet that's like, Juan Guaido installed as new Secretary of State in Peru. Like this kind of thing. Joe writes, many U.S. citizens still want to believe the system can work or is still working for them. Yeah, I mean, I think that there is, like, this is what we're talking about when we're talking about raising people's consciousness, right? Like, that's what that means, is that the people who believe the system is working for them, right, have bought in to the capitalist narrative, and that the capitalist narrative is manifesting itself in their lives, right? That capitalism gives wealth, prosperity, right? And because they're only experiencing the one side of it, because they're only seeing the consumption part of it, they're only seeing that part of it, and they don't see the cost of it. They don't see the militarization. They don't see the whole system has become so globalized and is so vast and so broad that all they really know is what's directly in front of them, and they literally have no conception of the tethers that are tied to any of this stuff, and that if you pull any of these tethers, at the end of all of these tethers is literally a kid in a mine, right? Or like or like somebody getting shot at in some country somewhere. Like it's always that way with the American empire. And so those people, you need to raise their consciousness and be like, hey, the world that you live in appears to be sunshiny and rainbows, but that's because you live in a bubble. You live in a bubble and you refuse to see the threads that extend outside of that bubble. And you certainly don't follow those threads. And then I do think that for the people who think that the system can work, I think that those people are just coping. Right? They don't recognize, they want to live in kind of this sort of delusional hope. They want to believe that somehow we, Americans, will avoid the exact same fate as literally any empire that's ever existed. Right? That somehow we will overcome. And that, in my view, is part of the manifest destiny idea of America, right? One of the foundational ideas of America is this concept of manifest destiny. This absolutely fallacious, absurdist idea that America is the greatest country in the world. We have the God-given right to govern and to rule, like all this kind of stuff. And it's just total trash that's going to collapse under their feet. And we often, here at the Canadian Commune, whenever we talk about manifest destiny, it's easy to connect it to the most militant, the most far-right psychopaths in the society. But there are regular, normal, average citizens that buy into that stuff, that are just like, no, we're somehow special. Like, this is America. This is the end of history. This is the greatest country in the world. The Fourth Reich will reign for 1,000 years. Like, we're going to be like this forever, right? There's going to be no change, and everything's going to be like this. And this is how it is. We're the glorious country of America, and it's just not going to happen that way. And how do we know? Because it never happens that way. It's always been the case that empires decay. It's always been the case that they fall into disarray. And is it possible that they don't? Sure. I like to acknowledge that it would, in fact, be possible for an empire to sustain itself over a long period of time. But for that empire to do that, it would need to actually have a theory to do so. It would actually have to have ideas and thoughts of how to actually maintain that, right? And one of the ideas and thoughts should be, hey, maybe we should, like, build stuff, right? If your idea is that your empire is going to last 1,000 years and that your empire is going to be this big thing that stands the test of time, well, you're not going to achieve that if you don't build things, right? You're not going to achieve that if you don't maintain things. You're not going to achieve that. And you're definitely not going to achieve that if everything you build is designed to be destroyed in 10 years. Like, it's definitely not going to happen that way. And so these people just need to be brought into the harsh light of reality and be told fairly straightforwardly, like, nah, bro, like, this stuff's coming down, and it's coming down fast. Like, you can't build a civilization unless you build a civilization. That's just the hard truth of it. Like, you can't stop pollution unless you stop pollution. Like, you can't. The number one way to actually ensure that your society doesn't collapse is to ensure your society doesn't collapse. And how do you do that? You build systems, and you say that these systems should stand, right? Because if you don't have institutions that can last past the lifespan of a human being, then nothing lasts past the lifespan of a human being. That as soon as the boomers are dead, huge segments of American society are going to go with them, right? There's like entire businesses, there's entire structures, entire institutions, privately held, owned by psychopathic billionaires who only care about money for themselves, like Warren Buffett, who's fine with cratering the stock market if it means that he gets to buy cheap stocks, right? And once these boomers start to die off, all of those businesses, everything that they liked, everything that they stood for is just going to wipe away. And it's just going to be gone. And we're all going to see that, oh yeah, there was no such thing as American culture. There is no such thing as Western civilization. It's just a fucking joke. It's just a cartoon show that was put on. And that's all. June writes ominously, John, I shall predict your doom. I mean, I could predict my doom too, if you'd like. I think that at some point in the future, I will die. Transylvanian writes, a lot of leftists still want to believe that the ballot box is a way out of this bourgeois dictatorship. But let me just ask you this. Why would your jailer give you the key to your prison cell? Yeah, it's just cultural catharsis at this point. That's all elections are. It's I don't mind if people vote in elections and like engage in electoralism, but don't pretend like it's going to do anything. It is just like culturalism. That's all. If there is such a thing as an American culture, it is certainly being articulated through the electoral system. But like, you know that American civilization, American culture doesn't exist when like a guy like Joe Rogan is an important figure in your society, right? Like when you got a guy like Joe Rogan who has a podcast, and that's like considered a major cultural touchstone that's worthy of conversation outside of just like some asshole talking. Like that's how you know. Oh, we don't actually have a real civilization. We don't actually have a real culture. It's not actually a real thing. Like Elon Musk doesn't matter. Like none of this matters. These guys are going to go like as soon as Elon Musk is dead, everyone will forget about him and no one will ever talk about him again. He's just so irrelevant. Yeah, Long Defiant. Manifest Destiny sounds a lot like Master Race or Chosen People. Always worth pointing out that the Nazis based a lot of their theory off of the American theory of Manifest Destiny and also critiqued it for being far too radical, right? Really think about that. That the Nazis who used the American theory of Manifest Destiny in their own writing went, this is too much. We need to edge this back a little bit. That's from the literal motherfucking Nazis. Kevin writes, I don't think many people want to think about any of this. Something deep down in their psyches knows shit is fucked, but not thinking about it allows them to forget things and just continue on. I think that you're hitting on something there, my man. I think that's absolutely true. I've been told by several people when they've listened in that the material is very heavy, that what I'm doing here is very heavy material. Right? It's not light and fluffy, right? Because I just push away the performativeness of it. And I just say, look, we have to acknowledge this as performance. What's actually going on here, right? And what's actually going on is like we've got a couple of rich dickheads who have basically taken over the quote-unquote culture, if you want to call it that, and are basically just cosplaying as civilization builders or cultural builders so that they can jerk off and have a good orgasm at night. Like that's fundamentally what is actually happening, right? That the entirety of American civilization is basically just Elon Musk shooting a load. That's the whole apex of the hierarchy, is just Warren Buffett getting off while having sex with one of Jeffrey Epstein's girls. That's the pinnacle. That's the very peak of our quote unquote civilization or quote unquote society. And people don't like that. People want to believe that what they're doing has purpose. People want to believe this is the reason why the society is in a malaise, right? Is that if we were doing nothing, right? If we were just a bunch of people milling about, growing food and eating the food and then chilling out most of the time, I think we would be very fine with that. I think that we'd be pretty happy and pleased with that arrangement. And then if we were a bunch of people who were extremely busy, our days just loaded from the moment we wake up to the moment we get to sleep, work, but we could see in front of us enormous structures being erected, huge institutions being created, enormous sweeping changes, the people living in homelessness and poverty suddenly being lifted out of that, being propelled into a new vision of reality, that we were obviously producing and building something of merit and worth. I think then we would also be quite happy and quite pleased with that. But what we're doing instead is we get all the work and all the exhaustion, no outcome whatsoever, literally nothing being built, nothing being done. In fact, the only institutions that we're literally building are like Jeffrey Epstein's pedophile island and Mark Zuckerberg's underground fortress bunker. That's literally all we're building, literally. And then and because we're all so busy, we don't even get to like chill out on the beach or have a good time. So it's the very definition of a wasted life. And people do not want to face up to the reality. They do not want to look in the mirror. They do not want to look in their hearts. And they do not want to look at their society and say, I have wasted my life on nothing. That what we are experiencing right now is a total miracle. The miracle of your life. That your life, the life that you are living right now, is an utter and complete total miracle that you are absolutely experiencing. You are in the driver's seat of a full-formed life form that is capable of experiencing abstract thought, articulating those abstract thoughts, and maybe, if you're lucky, materializing those abstract thoughts into reality. You are capable of reproducing and creating another life form into this reality. You are a miracle in and of yourself, and these capitalists want to put you in a little bottle to sell you as a product instead of unleashing you onto reality and having you maybe do something that actually has some merit. And people do not want to look at their school system, at their university education, at the career that they've had. People do not want to be 40 years old looking back on the last 40 years and go, oh, that was all a fucking waste of time. I've completely wasted my life. I've taken this precious jewel, this ultra special, amazing, miraculous piece of existence that I have been granted, that I have been given permission to have control of, that I can do what I want with this, and I have just squandered it utterly and totally. No one wants to hear that shit. No one wants to deal with that shit. No one wants to look at that shit, even though it's completely fucking true. That we all would have been better off going into fields and staring at the sky. That we should have been born to monkeys who literally were eating grapes and walnuts off of trees just going ooh ooh ah ah and living that monkey life, living and then dying. Better life, better served for this reality than what we're doing now. Because although you get to go on these roller coaster rides and have these digital hallucinations and all this kind of stuff, and haha, oh look, the theater and all this kind of stuff, we're literally burning it all down. So that Jeffrey Epstein can have a pedophile island that Warren Buffett can go to whenever he wants. And that's the point of it, near as I can tell. So yeah, people want the easier answers. They want to believe. They want to believe that I can just walk into a voting booth every 4 years and check the lesser of two evil boxes, and that will solve everything. No. Like, big no. Not real. Not a real thing that's really happening. And it's starting to get really obvious. It's starting to get, like, there's a desperation to it now. Like, when I take a look at the people who are really like coconut head for Kamala, boy, does it look desperate. Oh man, does it ever just like, it's like when you, it is like when you talk to a couple that is about to break up and they're really, really trying to act like they're not going to break up. Right? They obviously hate each other. There's obviously a wedge. There's obviously a problem. But they're there and they're like, no, we've never been happier. Yeah, we're going to get a dog is what we're going to do. Ha ha ha. That'll save the relationship. And they have that kind of like fake false smile and that false sense of security and that false, you know, the falseness of the presentation of everything is actually fine. Because maybe it will be. We don't know what the future has in store because we don't actually analyze history. Conton writes, what has me worried is there's this super progressive person I know, who I don't know if I can even talk politics with anymore because I've never seen such a pro-Ukraine person ever. Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I think we're all learning, I'm learning about, like, a person who says that they're leftist. People who say that they're leftists, it's like Jon Stewart, right? Like Jon Stewart, people consider Jon Stewart to be like a progressive left kind of person, and he is domestically. But when it comes to foreign issues, right, these very same people basically turn into far-right fascists. Because it turns out that a person who has empathy and compassion and wants to improve the quality of their society and is on the left can still be a bigot and still have these kind of racial ideas and still actually hold to the idea of othering. Right? That, oh, well, those are others. Those are other people. That if we do it, there's a good reason and it's justified. But if they do it, it's evil and it's wrong. Right? And so you can see this really. I think the clearest example of this that exists is the mega communist Eddie Liger. Right? Like he's becoming more and more prominent in the communist space and so is facing more and more criticism. And I think he has exactly this. I think he's got exactly this thing where he's a well-meaning young man who obviously wants to improve the quality of life for himself and the people around him, who sees that there's major workers' rights issues, right? But also carries with him the inherent bigotries of the country and the state and the city and the town and the neighborhood that he grew up in, right? He's a straight white man from Minnesota. Like, that's going to come with some stuff. And like, I'm a straight white man from Manitoba. I know all about it, right? And just downplaying the settler colonial history, downplaying the racial disparity, downplaying women's issues, downplaying all this kind of stuff in favor of issues that matter to him, right? And I think that comes from the fact that people, like, the hardest thing for a person to do, we were just talking about it, the hardest thing for a person to do is to deal with themselves. There's nothing more difficult. I know it's the most difficult thing for me, right? I'm positive that it's the most difficult thing for everybody else, right? To deal with yourself. It's tough. It's a hard thing to do, right? Like, don't you love when you're just standing on a street corner, like, waiting for the signal to change, and you're like, doop 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 doop. Hey, remember that thing you did where you were 12 and it ended up breaking that guy's foot? Remember? And you're just like, oh. hey, remember that time when you were 14 and you got into a deal with one of your friends and then you got skittish and backed out of the deal and your friend was really disappointed in you? Remember that time you got into a fight with your friend when you were 16 and you said some really bad shit, and you two never really healed that, and he moved away, and so you were never able to solve that problem? Right? Remember that? And you're just standing there, right? Nothing happened. You just get side-blinded by this shit. And the best that you can do is go, thank you, universe, for reminding me that I have grown. Thank you for reminding me that when I have these memories, I don't think to myself, haha, that's good that happened. I think to myself, boy, I wish I had played that out differently. Well, that's good. That's a sign of growth. Doesn't mean it felt good. Doesn't mean you were standing there thinking to yourself, like, boy, glad that sure happened to me. And from any outside perspective, literally you're just a dude standing there and things are just like and then the light changes and you cross the street. Right? Nobody around you knows that you just went through like a major existential crisis that was inflicted upon you by the universe. Nobody knows that just suddenly you were just blindsided by your past, and that like the ghost of Christmas past turned out and you just had like an out-of-body experience and just traveled back in time to your youth and relived this horrible moment that you wish could have been different. Right? Nobody knows that happened to you. And you just have to go along your life and pretend like it didn't, and then just like walk down. And if you get really good at it, you can just send it up to heaven, basically. Just send it out of your body, and then you return back to dun 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 dun. But it happened, and there it is. Deal with it. Get fucked. So much for all the like, you're the author of your own fate. You're the author of your own. Shut up. What are you talking about? If I was the author of my own fate, I don't think I would write in, and then John, standing on the street corner, has an existential crisis inflicted upon him suddenly and unexpectedly. Just those moments when you're like talking to a beautiful woman or a handsome man, and then all of the sudden, the only thing that you can think about is the time that your mom made you feel belittled or childish in front of a boy that you liked. And then suddenly you're getting all flushed and embarrassed in front of this other person for another reason, but they think it's about you or about them or something. And then they get all kind of weird and off-put, and you're like, no, why, universe, why? But you're in control, for sure. That's definitely what's happening. And so I think people don't unpack themselves, and they just either bottle it up, the classic like Irish Catholic response, right? Just bottle it up and then have a big explosion in your midlife, or then or push it away, try not to deal with it, or just like do the Christian solution and be like, this is God's will, God will make it all work out, and everything will be fine. But nobody actually wants to look it in the face and be like, okay, let's actually try to take the position of the Russians. Let's actually try to take the position of somebody other than myself. Let's actually think. Because and the hard reality is that if you can't think about yourself in relation to everything in the universe, then you're not going to think about them in relation to anything in the universe. You're just not going to do it. Because you don't do it, right? Self-analysis is, if you can do a successful self-analysis, then you can do a successful analysis. But if you don't even try to do a self-analysis, then you're never going to do a good analysis of anything else. You don't even know yourself, right? It's like the Sun Tzu quote. Like, maybe you'll be right like 50% of the time, right? But you'll be wrong another 50% of the time. But if you know yourself and your enemy, right, then you'll be successful every time. Like, if you only know yourself and you don't know your enemy, you'll win about 50% of the time. If you know your enemy and you don't know yourself, you'll win about 50% of the time. But if you know yourself and your enemy, you'll win about 100% of the time. Well, not 100%, obviously. Nobody wins 100% of the time. But, like, he says something along the lines of, victory is all but assured. And so these, like, progressive leftist types, I think are dealing, who when it comes to issues of domestic foreign powers, these people, I think, are dealing with a much, much larger problem, right? Because fundamentally at their core, what they're doing is they are othering. That they still have within themselves this idea that the Russians are bad, scary, spooky people who are led by a psycho, right? Just the most childish take you could possibly have. Just Marvel brain shit. Literally just their cartoon characters, right? And it isn't until you actually look at them, and it isn't until you actually see them, and it isn't until you actually hear what they say, that you start to think to yourself, oh man, yeah, these are just people who have a different perspective. And their perspective is not American and not Western. And what do they have to say about us? And it isn't until you're willing to do a self-analysis of yourself and your own culture that you're willing to hear criticism of that culture and take it seriously, right? So I think that those people are on, like, they're well-meaning people, I think, that if they were to be given, like, a mayorship of a town, they would do everything they could for that town in a positive way. I'm dead sure of it. But because they refuse to stop with this incessant othering, that their humanity is national. That's what it is. That at their base they are still nationalists. That they don't think humanity extends outside their borders, and they think humanity ends at their borders. And that humanity is not a global phenomenon, it's a national phenomenon. Yeah, that's what that is. Yeah, I'm glad I had that big, long diatribe so I could land on that point, because I think that is it. Now, I think I've got a new shorthand, right? That super progressive people who are still, like, pro-Ukrainian are still nationalists. And they haven't broken that idea of nationalism, and that there is another form of existence that goes beyond the national identity, and that's the human identity and our humanity, our collective humanity, and that we can act for the good of all humanity, and that when two different nations fight or go to war, we should be asking serious questions about why that happened, instead of simply picking a side to demonize and saying, well, you invaded, so therefore you are the new Hitler, and blah blah blah. All this kind of just kind of brain dead shit, right? Like, it's a very, very rare situation, a very, very rare individual that is just straight up like, oh, this guy is actually a psycho, right? Like, Hitler was probably a psycho, right? Like, a legitimate psychopath. But even his rise to power is just loaded with analysis and loaded with, like, how did this happen? What were the circumstances? How, like it isn't as simple as guy ascended to power out of the force of his charisma, you know? Anyway. Isaac writes, Maduro said that if the U.S. doesn't stop their aggression, he's going to send all the oil and gas destined to the U.S. and Europe to the BRICS. He said India and China wants it. Yeah, he should. Straight up, he should. Like, enough of this fucking around, right? Enough of this. Like, enough of this just absolute dumbass dickering and bullshit, right? Like, enough of this nonsense that the Venezuelans have had to put up with. The Venezuelans have had to put up with a lot of fucking bullshit from the United States for a long time now. And and he should do it. He should just send all his oil and gas to China and India, and he should just leave the United States in a total lurch. Because the U.S. needs to learn a big lesson. And the big lesson that it needs to learn is that, hey, if you want people to like you, then you should act in a way that people like. And that you can only really be like a terror state for so long, right? And of course, America is going to learn this lesson the hard way. Because if you act like a terrorist state abroad, eventually you act like a terrorist state domestically. And that's basically what they're setting themselves up for. Like, the next generations of the United States are for sure going to be led by just complete and total psychos. Literally, like, I've just put up on the screen an article from CNN. operating theaters, bowling alleys, and home cinemas. Not happy with safe rooms. The super rich are building luxury fortresses. These luxury fortresses that they are building, some speculate it's like climate change and all this kind of yabba yabba and all this kind of, but at the end of the day, this is going to be their like evil James Bond villain lair place that they govern from, basically. That they'll have like surrogates, right? The governor of Florida will be in the thrall of Mark Zuckerberg, who essentially is just governing from this mountain palace that he has built, right? And then you've got the cop cities, right? You've got the cop cities. And so America is anticipating this. The American ruling class and the wealthy of America are 100% anticipating that all of the terrorism that they are inflicting abroad is going to come home. And that all of these terrorists that they've been training, soldiers, CIA agents, are going to come home and they're going to become the new governing class. And they're going to rule America with exactly the same policies and attitudes that they learned in Afghanistan and Iraq. And it's not going to be any different, right? That America is going to turn itself into a military dictatorship, if it isn't already one. And the place is basically going to be governed by a series of fortresses that they're building all across America. You can look up the cop cities, right? And some of the states will, in some states that strategy will succeed, and in some it won't. That's all. And so if I was Venezuela, right, if I was any country outside of the United States, I would be seriously thinking to myself, how do I detach my wagon from this star? How do I get away from this? How do I make it so that I am no longer linked to these people economically? Like, how do I ensure the success and the security of my own country and my own people without empowering these obvious narcissistic psychopaths that are doing everything they possibly can to lose credibility as fast as possible? So the only reason I think at this point why any country should continue relations with America is out of the hope that it will stop a war. Like, that seems to be China's strategy, that China is sitting there being like, we need to get somewhat linked up into the American system, right? Producing their goods, like having a bunch of their treasury bonds, all that kind of stuff, so that if war starts between us, we'll have some leverage and we'll be able to literally shut their economy down, or at least force them to change it. Like, that's a good strategy if you're a big powerhouse superpower like China. But if you're like Venezuela, who, you know, you've got power in your own right, but it's certainly not on the same scale as China. Yeah, I know which way I would go and which way you should go. Like, one star is rising and one is declining very swiftly. Yeah, Long Defiant writes, we can't even build subways in our cities. Yeah. Well, and with the way climate change is going, a lot of the subways that exist across the globe are just going to be flooded. Like the New York subway system, this is my absolute favorite thing, guys. I'm really looking forward to this. I cannot wait until one of my followers and one of my regulars sends me the article or sends me the video of New Yorkers complaining about how they can no longer use the subway system, because that's actually going to be something that is going to be like, we got to do something about climate change. Once you start getting like New Yorkers, you know, hey, what's with the subway? What's going on with the subway system? We're just working with the subway system. Every single time I go down there, there's water. It's flooded. We can't do anything about it, right? And try to be a climate change denier in front of a New Yorker who's experiencing a flooded subway system. Yeah, that's going to go real well for you, I'm sure. So I'm really looking forward to that. I'm really looking forward to seeing the New Yorkers in conversation. I'm really looking forward to seeing the Talking Heads CNN report where they interview like the mayor of New York, right? Who is probably just and they'll ask him a question. So, Mr. Mayor of New York, what do you think about the people who are saying that climate change is a Chinese hoax? And be like, these people are idiots, right? I'm so looking forward to it, because finally we'll just get a bunch of people talking the way we should have been talking 20 years ago to these climate change denialists, right? Just a bunch of people being like, we should fucking lock these guys up. What are you fucking talking about? Look at the subway system. Super looking forward to it. Content writes, progressives as you can possibly be, but Christ alive, they are hawkish as possible towards Russia. It's odd, kind of alarming. It's just othering, bro. That's it. They just don't see Russians as humans. That's really what it is. That their humanity doesn't extend past the national border because they're a nationalist. And like nationalism it's tough. Like it's not. I think it's natural for people to be nationalists. I think it's a fairly normal position for a person to hold, and it's just part of growing up, right? And the only way you can grow up is by decompacting yourself and by deconstructing yourself and just being like, okay, I am not actually a Canadian, right? The concept of Canada doesn't actually exist, but I am a human. Right? And that person who lives in Russia, well, Russia doesn't really exist. There is no such thing as Russia. It's just kind of an agreed upon thing that all of these humans have said, sure, we'll define ourselves culturally and collectively by this concept of Russia. But they're still just a human being, and they're doing the same thing you're doing. They're just over there. That's it. And as soon as you come to that and actually acknowledge that that's the case, then you can start to actually look at people a little bit more seriously. But it's a big part of growing up. It's just how you view your parents as infallible, and then suddenly one day you go like, nah, they're just people. Fiddleford, how you doing over there on Twitch? Russia is a mirror the West considers ugly. Stomps, good to see you, my man. I'm looking forward. June, you have written, John, I shall predict your doom. I'm looking forward to this, June. Someday you're going to step on the toes of a person with a much larger platform than yours, and they're going to make a video attacking you or challenging to a debate, and a bunch of their brain-dead fans are going to flunge your comment, and it's just going to be too much to put up with. Nah, that sounds awesome. I'm down for that. That sounds like a good time. Like, as long as you're not a Nazi, right? Like, we've dealt with Nazis coming in here. As soon as you're a Nazi, we just pick you right out. But like, what? I don't know, dude. A bunch of people coming in here and actually like create, like, it's only going to increase. It will only increase my power. More. I thought that you were going to say that they would like find me, they would like dox me and then kill me. It doesn't sound like my doom. Transylvanian says, if voting made a difference, or as another person said, the master's tool will never dismantle the master's house. Yeah. Nilo writes, the electoral system problem is like the religion problem. If you want to indulge in it, that's fine, but it becomes false consciousness and counter-revolutionary. It's not okay anymore. Yeah. Joe writes, John, you do just fine giving the heavy subject matter some levity. Oh, well, that's kind of you to say, Joe. I do appreciate it. Like, I mean, I do this for myself as much as I do it for you, right? Like that if I've said it over and over again, if I don't do this, right? If this isn't the dumping ground for these thoughts that I have, then I do it out in the real world. And that's a problem. I've come to see that it was a problem. I look back, I was just talking about how, like, remember that time you did the thing? Well, sometimes that thought is, yeah, remember that time you, like, really did, like, a huge dump on, like, your brother or your dad or like, just a friend that you were talking to, right? Remember that time that you were just, like, and then you, like, got to the end of it and you were like, I am sorry that I did that. Yeah, I don't like that. Well, you know what helps? Doing that elsewhere. Finding another outlet for that. Here we are. Hello. And so, I don't know, I talk about this so much that I feel like it's easy to make it have a little bit of levity because of how absurd it all is. Right? It's the most absurd shit of life. Like, we as a people could literally just be involved in the production of food and the maintenance of shelter, and that would be the labor of our lives, and then we could just chill out on the beach for the rest of it. And that could be literally what life was. That could be literally what our life is. That we straightforwardly, in a very tangible and real way, could basically just be chilling out, thinking about how to best entertain ourselves and how to do awesome and cool shit. That's it. That could be the entire tenor of our entire lives, our entire society, all of its institutions and all of its structures could be designed specifically to ask us the question: what do you think this is? Like, why do you think we're here? What do you think reality is? How do you think we should manifest that reality into this reality? Like, what do you think that any of this? Like, we could be having very serious conversations about the nature of our reality, and we could be using our technological prowess, and we could be using this grand miracle of oil, which is the corpses of the dead, the final gift of our ancestors to us, and we could be using all of that in order to explore this extraordinarily serious conundrum that we find ourselves in, which is, what is this? Why are we here? What is the point of any of this? And instead of that, we're all just essentially intellectually masturbating so that Jeff Bezos can fuck a little girl in space. That's basically what it all comes down to for us. It's the most pointless shit of our lives. And because it's gotten to that level of absurdity, because it's attained this sort of level of utter silliness, it's not really me that's making it have levity anymore. The situation itself has levity. The only thing that makes it, like, it's this odd juxtaposition. And there is like an odd juxtaposition about it, where it's deathly serious, extremely dark. There are literal rapists and psychopathic killers at the highest possible level of our society and our system. We can point at them. We know who they are, right? They've been tried in court. There have been affidavits. We've got all the evidence you could possibly want to see. And so on the one hand, it is this very dark, bleak, gritty reality. But then on the other hand, it's just so buffoonish. It's so clownishly stupid. It's just so, like, if I actually had stakes in it, I would be like, it's embarrassing. It's cringy. It's just like, oh my God, that these are the people, and these people are literally standing in front of the world being like, we're the greatest country in the world. Like, shut up. It's simultaneously horrifying, but you simultaneously have to laugh at it because it's so dumb. Like, it's so stupid. And it's all this storm in a teacup. That's the best part about it. It's just this utter total storm in a teacup of just like, look at our grandeur and look how impressive we are and look how amazing we are. And in literally 50, 60, 70 years, 100 years, in 1 century from now, no one will fucking care. No one will give 2 shits about Elon Musk. No one will give 2 shits at all about Kamala Harris. Right? They'll probably talk about Kamala Harris like less than they talk about like Andrew Garfield. Like, she'll be so irrelevant. None of this will matter. Donald Trump will get more traction historically than Kamala Harris will. The floundering embarrassment of how self-important we think we all are, when in a very short period of time, most of this is going to be completely fucking forgotten. And the only thing anybody will actually care about is, gee dang, is it hot? I sure wish those morons had done something about this. Oh well. Guess we'll keep living with it. Woke CIA drone pilot writes, Elon will be immortalized as the father of the cybernetic race. Yeah, right. Nilo writes, it's important not to sugarcoat the truth to make it palatable and corrode it in the process. The ruling class are well aware that it's hard to cope with the horrors of their actions. I'm quite sure. Yeah. Transylvanian writes, plenty of mansions, yachts, and bombs are still being built. Apart from that, not much else. It shows you exactly where the priorities of this society lie. Long Defiant writes, America's next set of founders, the refounders, will be the people who bring socialized medicine and break the power of private property. We'll see. I mean, you guys know my position on this. The far more likely outcome is that the United States goes through a breakup. That's it. That it just has, like, a bunch of states just go their own way. Right? That's it. that they basically look at the federal government and they say, nah, you're not actually doing anything. You're not actually helping us out, right? And very steadily, like, states will begin to realize that, oh, like, the United States military is essentially a mercenary army now, and the mercenaries are not very likely to win in any kind of long-term conflagration, right? Like, if you think about these cop cities that they're building, right? So if one of these cop cities decides, this federal government is a burden, we don't need to put up with this, well, they're an extremely well-equipped, well-armed military force that exists domestically in the United States. And if a mercenary army rolls in there to suppress them, they're going to get met with resistance. And mercenary armies are notoriously cowardly. And so they're not going to stick around and fight a dirty war for the federal American government that no longer has the military force to be able to wage any war anywhere in the world successfully, because they're primarily a mercenary force now. Oh, I'm not gonna read that out, Nilo, for obvious reasons, but I see what you're saying. Stomps, good to see you. I don't know if I said hello to you, but hello. Transylvanian writes about the Venezuelan oil sell. You know, India will just resell the oil to the West at a markup. Still a win-win for Venezuela and India, but seeing as the U.S. can print infinite money, it won't really hurt them that much. Well, as soon as the infinite money glitch goes away, which it's going to, like, you can't... People are just losing faith in the American economy and the American ability to actually, like, what are they even doing? Like everything that I talk about, like the falseness of American culture and the fakery of all of this kind of stuff. Like, I'm just a guy that is in the heart of the empire, right? I'm in one of the major cities of the empire, and I see it clearly. I can't imagine what, like, the leadership of India, the leadership of China, the leadership of Russia, right, the leadership of African countries, of South American countries, like, these guys see it, right? They see what I see, because they're looking at it from the outside, and they're also looking at it at the very top of their cultures and their societies, and being and with way higher stakes, like. The decisions that they make are actually going to have profound impacts on their society and on their culture, right? So they have to call it right. They don't have the luxury of this sort of demented American position where the Americans are so deluded and demented with their own grandeur. They don't have that luxury. They got to call this right. And so a lot of these guys really do understand that, like, this infinite money glitch that the Americans are rolling on, if that goes away, so too does the empire. And I think a lot of people are highly incentivized to get rid of the American empire and to see the Americans go into a regression and into a period of domestic concern and struggle domestically. Like, I think most people in the world, most countries in the world, if you walked up to them and said, hey, would you support it if your leader did something that made it so the Americans could not really be involved in your politics for a while? Most people would be like, yeah, let's do that. So, and the way to do that is to stop trading on the dollar, right? Reduce the value of the dollar. Just make it, like, so many of the solutions moving forward are very simply stop participating. Like, if you see a system that has these negative outcomes, right, the first thing to do is to stop participating in it. Just don't involve yourself. Get out of it. Like, disconnect from it as much as you possibly can, because that system is going to continue having negative outcomes. Right? These systems were created by slavers and monarchs in order to maintain slavery and monarchy. They weren't maintained to help you. Like, they weren't created to help you. Do we all go down with it is the next question. I mean, this is the question of revolution, right? Like, this brings us to, like, the revolutionary moments and the revolutionary talk of, like, what is to be done. Because, like, what we are erecting are a series of military dictatorships, right? That every single individual state becomes its own little military dictatorship. You have a cop city, and then you have like an electoral system that kind of exists, right? That like this kind of like performative catharsis-based cultural artifact that the police allow to be in place because it doesn't really affect them, right? It doesn't really impact the way that they govern or the way that they rule each individual state. And as long as the people go along with this setup, right, then they don't need to go full-blown fascist, nor do they need to go full-blown like socialist. They don't need to go full-blown anything. They can just basically maintain the police state and show up and suppress people wherever they are. Like, this is how the samurai took power. Like, there's huge historical precedent for this. That and we're watching it be built in front of our eyes. That the thinking of the ruling class, the short-term capitalist thinking of the ruling class is, if we build a fortress for cops in this area, then that will suppress any revolution or any negative aspect. But there's never, ever really the thought of, what if this cop city just decides to say, we're in charge? Like, we're in charge of Minnesota. We're in charge of Nevada. Yeah, this fortress, this group of cops, we're in charge of Colorado. No, we don't give a shit what the president of the United States has to say. We don't care. Right? We're going to govern ourselves. That's the most likely outcome, historically speaking. Like, once you have this like weak, ineffectual, unpopular ruling system and ruling class, and then you have a huge militant force, a huge military apparatus that is beginning to see more and more that political system is having negative outcomes, even for the military, even for the militant. It's not capable of producing intelligent people who actually have an intelligent view of global politics. Once the military and once the police begin to lose faith in the electoral systems, as does happen in history and has happened many times in history, they just decide to take over, and they do. So to me, that's the most likely outcome. And the result of this, first of all, the result of this will be a generalized civil war, right? Because the federal government isn't going to just say, oh, no, okay, right? And so there's going to be some kind of conflict along those lines. But I think the general result is going to be state by state, right? Some states will go full-blown Nazi fascism. Like, I think that Florida will absolutely go that direction, 100%. Like, the leader of Florida will be like Adolf Hitler, no trouble, right? And then you'll have like people who are like far right corporatists, essentially, right? And that's like Texas, right? Texas might go full-blown Nazi, but I think they'll basically just be like George W. Bush level fascism, you know what I mean? Just sort of like this folksy dumbass. We love Jesus and guns, you know? And then I do think that some states will actually be like, hey, you know, we can do better than this. We can do better. Like, we the police force of Seattle actually do think that it would be better for us if there were less homeless people. Yeah. How do we make that happen? Oh, we can make that happen by just giving homeless people houses? Oh, okay. Yeah, reasonable. Sure. You know? So I think it's going to be state by state, and that as the American empire collapses and as it falls into its decline, and again, I like to really, really put this cap on it, not going to happen today, not going to happen tomorrow, not going to happen in 10 years, 20 years, but this is the trajectory that America is on. There's just no reality in which America stays together. It's just not real. And I think Canada's facing the same fate. Like, when you look at our historical trajectory, like, what are you talking about? Canada was made by the Hudson's Bay Company trying to get furs over to Europe, and the Queen. And the Queen is dead. The monarchy that set this country up is basically dead and gone. We've declared our independence from it. But the systems still remain, and the edifice of it still remains. And I think eventually people are going to go, hold on, wait a fucking minute. This was all set up by some dead queen nobody gives a shit, and some like fur company that barely exists anymore. And now you're telling me I got to pay 50% of my taxes to go kill children in Gaza? Fuck you. Like, and then on top of that, I can't even buy a house. I can barely pay my rent while working 2 jobs. Fuck you. There's no such thing as Canada. And eventually there's just going to be a huge segment of people that'll just be like, yeah, this federal government is a huge burden. It's causing major problems. The corporate sector that exists and the corporatization of our government is obviously a slave system. Fuck this whole thing. We don't care anymore. We're not interested. And once you get military talking that way, right? Once you get military personnel who are like going into like long-term care homes being like, oh shit, this is a train wreck. This is a freak show. Like, once you lose the faith of your military personnel, military coups are not that difficult to do. Right? They're not. You just have to have the will to do them. And like, we've seen this again and again. Like, this is Gaddafi's story. Right? Muammar Gaddafi's story literally is that the leadership of Libya was just old, disconnected, and pathetic, and not doing anything to help the people of Libya. And so Gaddafi, who was like a lieutenant in the military, just got a bunch of military people, essentially walks into the palace, looks at the king, and basically says, you're not in charge, right? And the king basically goes, yeah, you're right. And Gaddafi just becomes the ruler of Libya. Like, that can happen here. It's actually the most likely outcome for what's going to happen here. Vladimir Putin. Always a pleasure to see the president of Russia in the chat. Hello, Canadian commie. Hope you are well. Important question. Do you think Iran will strike Israel tonight, or is it just a couple of nights away? My feeling about Iran, and this is predictive, so when you get into these sorts of predictions, you can be wrong. And I was wrong about the invasion of Ukraine, and I'm happy to say that. I just didn't think the United States would be insane enough to allow it to happen. I thought that when they saw the Russians beginning the assault, they would have been like, whoa, okay. That the invasion of Ukraine really convinced me that the Americans are very stupid. Like, it was the most avoidable thing. They could have avoided it super easily, and they didn't. So I was wrong about that prediction, and I learned a lot. And so the same sort of logic applies here with, like, will Iran strike Israel? I think that Iran, through this period of time being the war on terror, has shown a remarkable amount of patience. Just like a literally divine level of patience. Straight up, just like Muhammad the Prophet has inhabited the people of Iran and been like, patience. And that they have gone through a lot. And I think that Iran will only strike when it is certain of victory. It will not strike until it is absolutely sure, 100%, that they will win and that they cannot lose. And until that happens, until the pieces align and until everything comes into full alignment and full clarity, where the governing class of Iran is convinced beyond the shadow of a doubt that moving their troops over to Israel and in order to do an invasion to destroy Israel will succeed immediately, And not in this like American or like Nazi way of like, we'll just go in there, it'll last a week. They'll feed us as liberators. America, mission accomplished, right? No. Until they know that they can move in there and it'll be over. And they'll grab Netanyahu and they'll bring him back to Iran, right? Until they know that they can do that, they're not going to move a muscle. They've been withstanding an overwhelming amount of abuse. They've been withstanding an overwhelming amount of abuse from the West, from Israel, from Saudi Arabia even, from a lot of different places and for a long time. And so they are not going to risk anything. The thing that has blown me away about Iran, and the more I read about Iran, and the more I learn about Iran, and the more I study Iran, and the more I take a comb to Iran, the more I see a group of people that are just hunkered down, stable, and praying for an end to this conflict, and that the war will not enter their borders, and that the war will not sweep through, and that they won't have CIA death squads walking through their streets, and that they won't have that kind of death and destruction wrought on them that they see in Iraq, that they see in Afghanistan, that they see in Yemen, that they see around them. And so they're moving very delicately and very, very carefully. Israel keeps trying to provoke them into a reckless attack. Israel keeps trying to provoke them into a reckless attack. And I don't think that reckless attack is coming. I do think that the strategy that Iran has, and I actually, incidentally, I think this is the same strategy that Russia and China both have, right? I think that China and Russia are working with Iran in order to just essentially steadily crank a noose around Israel. That's really what they're trying to do. That they've got like Hezbollah, they've got Hamas, they've got militants, highly motivated militants on the ground who are technically third party, but who everybody knows are receiving funding from at least Iran. And so you have this like pipeline of like Chinese, Russian support into Iran that turns into support. So it's not officially Iran, but it's like a mercenary group. But the mercenary groups are not operating on the same typical rules of mercenaries because they are highly motivated from a religious perspective. Like they're taking a look at the genocide and they're going, this is ungodly. Like this needs to end. This is a crime against humanity. And so they're not mercenaries in the same way, but in terms of the law, in terms of how like legal jurisdiction works and how the UN perceives them and how all of this perceives them, they're still technically a mercenary group. Although I think you could call them like a religious. There's a name for this, and I'm blanking on it all of a sudden, of just like religious zealots essentially, but it's not the right term, but it's in that category. And so I think Iran's strategy is use Hezbollah, use Hamas, use any other organization or any other group on the ground to just steadily tighten the noose around Israel. Like the Houthis. The Houthis is a good example, right? Like just blockade. So it's just this steady crushing. And that because Israel has lost the support of the rest of the world, they don't have anywhere to turn. And because America's only solution is drop bombs, and they don't actually know how to do diplomacy, they don't actually know how to proceed properly, all they know how to do is overthrow governments. And because that's not a solution in this circumstance, the Americans are sort of like, I guess we'll just give you more guns. I guess we'll just give you more weapons, while failing to realize that like Israel is essentially undergoing a sanction regime that is just steadily crushing them more and more and more. And Israel, I think, is going to happily stand there looking at Israel, watching it just steadily get crushed, just slowly crushed. And every so often Israel will lash out. Israel will drop a bunch of bombs somewhere on Lebanon. Israel will do a whole bunch of destruction in Jordan, right? It'll lash out because it's desperate and it doesn't know what to do anymore. It doesn't have, and its leadership is just trying to show its people, yeah, you're being crushed underneath these sanctions that we're all experiencing. They're not sanctions, but they're essentially sanctions that we're just getting steadily crushed under. But look, we assassinated a leader. Look, we did a bombing campaign over here. And just the noose just gets tighter and tighter and tighter and tighter and just crush until eventually Israel will just be so weak and will be such a pariah state that when the Iranians finally do move in, and it'll likely be the Iranians, even the United States will be like, okay. Like, somehow the United States will try to spin it so that it was their victory. Like, that's how massive a pariah Israel is going to become. And they are turning into an absolute pariah state. Like, no one is going to trade with these guys. No one is going to do business with these people. No one is going... even on the psychopathic line of corporate capitalism, even these guys are like, yeah, like, it's a huge military threat. Like, our ships get shot at by the Houthis. And then on top of that, it's like, people will not use our service if they even think that we are part of Israel, so it's best for us to not be involved. Like, just from the raw capitalist numbers. And eventually, Israel becomes such a boil and such a festering wound on the side of the Western world, so despised, so despicable, so disgraceful, so obviously Nazi, so obviously supremacist in its worldview, so obviously psychotic, that even the Western world is eventually going to have to go, like, okay, time to cut our losses. If we actually want to reach out to the rest of the world and actually engage in diplomacy and actually engage in any of this and actually be part of the world economy that is emerging today, if we actually want to be involved in that, we got to get rid of Israel. Israel's becoming a liability. The only reason the Western world hasn't come to that conclusion yet is because of AIPAC and because of the lobbying that is happening and how pathetically easy it is to buy these politicians. Like, that's the part about it that's so funny. It's so funny when you really realize, like, when I first started thinking about, like, AIPAC and, like, the lobbying and the Israel lobby and all this kind of stuff, like, I was like, oh man, yeah, of course. Like, think about how much money these guys must have. They're being funded by billionaires. So the billionaires are, like, giving these guys, like, you know, $10 million or huge incentives, all this kind of stuff. And you take a look at what the actual numbers are, and, like, the donations to some of these guys' campaigns is literally $10,000. Like, it's literally fucking nothing. And it's just like, that's how embarrassing it is. That's how embarrassingly easy it is to buy these shills. How completely bereft of principles these liberals are. That they can literally be bought with a $10,000 donation. And just, like, their party leader looking at them being like, you better vote for Israel. As if that's a credible and serious threat. Like, it's so childishly stupid and incompetent. Like, it really is like baby's first government. And there really does come a time, and again, it's not going to be tomorrow, right? That the genocide of the Palestinians and the situation that's been happening in Israel has been happening for a long fucking time. It's not going to be tomorrow, but eventually the Western world, like, when Iran moves in, even the Western world will be like, okay, it's over. It's done now. And if the West is smart, right, if it actually wants to get on the right side of this, it'll do what it did to the Nazis, right? It'll pretend like it wasn't doing trade or supporting them the whole time. It'll pretend like Henry Ford wasn't the one responsible for funding the Nazi war machine. It'll pretend all of this, and it'll say, Israel has become a rogue state. It's become a big threat in the world. We got to do everything we can to make sure that everything is fine here. And they'll support a joint effort with Iran, UK, France, Germany, and they'll go in. And when they go in, they'll do it just to grab Netanyahu or whoever the leader they decide to scapegoat is. And then they'll install their own guy. And it'll essentially be still governed by the West, but it'll be more in control directly of somebody who's literally like, okay, we cut down on this apartheid shit. We're losing significant trade deals here. We're losing lots of money because of this for no fucking reason. So that you guys can basically just jerk off about this apartheid that you want to do. Fuck that. Shut up. That's over. And they'll stand in front of the world and be like, we here in America believe for truth and liberty, and the Western world will absolutely forget that it was completely a Western project in the first place. Right? Like, just how like the Western world completely forgot or was completely unaware that Saddam Hussein was a Western project, right? Like nobody gives a shit, right? And so America will just talk this big game about how it solved the problem it itself was responsible for creating. But it'll create a lot of goodwill. It'll create a lot of goodwill in the Middle East and around the world, which is what fundamentally I think what the Americans are desperate for now. Like their game of supremacy is coming to an end. And I think that even they are becoming more and more aware day by day that war is just not, it's not going to carry the day. They're not going to be able to do full-scale wars against Russia and China and have that be successful. They just, like, that's just true. Not only is it, like, not possible from the capability standpoint, it's also deeply unpopular. Any leader that even attempted to suggest that they were going to go to a full-scale war against China would likely be deposed that night. So, like, the likelihood of any of this devolving into, like, World War III, I just don't see that happening. The United States is too weak and too stupid, and its competitors are smarter than it is by a lot. And so the most likely result is going to be the United States turning against Israel in the end, because that's what the United States has always done. It has no principles. It doesn't plan for anything. It doesn't actually have ideas or thoughts or foresight. When it does have ideas and thoughts and foresight, it's always along this "how do we make more money for Elon Musk" line, right? Like, and the end result is always self-destructive, like what they did to the education system, right? The American education system got completely destroyed and gutted by capitalists because the capitalists were, like, afraid that if they educated people, those people would depose the capitalists. And so what have you ended up with? You've ended up with just a country of dimwits who don't know fucking anything, right? And so what have you ended up with? You've ended up with a bunch of leaders who are fucking dimwits who don't know anything. Because nobody's actually educated in America. And the concept of being educated is actually like it's literally a political position to be anti-intellectual. To be like, that person's book learned, it's bad. And people go, yeah, he thinks he's smarter than us. It's like, no, we don't think we're smarter than you, my man. Like, Fofacone, good to see you. The paper tiger is showing how weak it really is, you bet. Yep. CH, good to see you. The EU, NATO will laud the US for barely partially solving the problem it created. Yep. Like falling backwards on a box of bullets. I saw nothing. Nuclear weapons and moral principles cannot coexist. Yeah, I mean, that's how you know, like, the Reagan administration was doing nuclear disarmament, right? Really think about that. Like, Ronald Reagan, easily one of the worst presidents. I mean, if you want to pick presidents, the best American presidents are the least effective ones. The ones who just kind of were too limp and too weak and too pathetic to really get anything done. Those are the best presidents. The ones who come in with this yeehaw attitude and we're going to do a whole bunch of stuff, they always end up being the clowns. And Ronald Reagan was clown supreme, which is why he gets lauded so heavily in America, because he's the best clown. But even this fucking clown was like, we probably shouldn't have nukes, right? Like, certainly not this amount of nukes. And we definitely shouldn't have a world culture of an arms race, right? We definitely shouldn't have this idea of building more of these things. And it's the Bush administration, the George W. Bush, that reignites the arms race. And in many ways, you can point at that beginning of the arms race under the Bush administration for the militarization of Russia and its ability to invade Ukraine. Like, disarmament is absolutely something we should be doing. Right? It's absolutely something we should be doing. It's the wisest position. Like, there's no reality in which having these nukes is helpful or useful or beneficial to anyone. There's no reason to have them. Yeah, George W. Bush is a war criminal for sure. But I mean, like, it's getting obvious to everybody. Like, Obama is a war criminal. I actually think that what Obama did was worse than what Bush did. Like, George W. Bush went into a country that the CIA had essentially done a coup on with the help of Saddam Hussein, right? That Saddam Hussein is the leader of Iraq because of the United States. And the United States basically put their boy in there because it was like, we want access to your oil, right? And that's the story. Classic. And so when W goes in, he's really just going in there to sort of finish the job and tie up a loose thread, right? It's just a continuation of the shitty American game that was going on in Iraq. Gaddafi's a different story completely. Gaddafi is a socialist leader. He considered himself a Marxist-Leninist, eliminated homelessness in his country, increased the prosperity of his country, became the strongest economy on the African continent, 100% was dedicated to the idea of improving the quality of life of his citizens. The literacy rate skyrocketed. He was able to actually seriously begin talking about creating like a Pan-African alliance and an African currency. And this is the reason they killed him. And they turned Libya into a slave state where there's like open slave trade markets and the Americans keep funding gangs to ensure that there's constant warfare in the region. Like, that's Obama. Thanks, Obama. Hillary Clinton, his Secretary of State, literally cackled about it on live TV. We came, we saw, he died. Like a witch. And then was shocked when nobody voted for her. And so, like, they're all war criminals. Like, it's really obvious. The United States is like this enormous terrorist organization that exists in the world. And, like, no one's even remotely close. Right? Like, it's not even remotely close. Even Melanie condemns what France did. Sarkozy was actually charged over it. Yeah, France is a big player in that mess. Yeah, of course. Like, France's entire economy is based on this colonial period. That's what's so funny about these guys, even these like mega communist types that are saying like, settler colonialism was so long ago. We don't need to talk about that anymore, right? Why are we talking about that anymore? Why are we talking about this settler colonialism anymore? Like, literally because those settler colonialist projects are still a major part of our economy. Like, the French economy is heavily tied up in its colonial projects. Like, they rely really heavily on the materials and the goods that they get from Africa. And the history, like how often have you guys seen me do this? Where somebody has come in and claiming to be from Africa. And I just, like, look at the country, and I just say, like, okay, when did the colonization happen? When did they colonize you? And sure enough, there's this period of European colonization, and the period of European colonization begins by the colonizing power, France usually in this case, essentially just having their own man there, and then eventually their own man gets deposed by some king, someone who has enough military power within the region to be able to do it. But then that king essentially continues acting as a surrogate for colonial power. That the structure remains intact. It's just that this king is now able to skim something off the top, and so makes a lot of money for himself, right? Which is the incentive he had to overthrow it, even though he says to his people, we're doing this for the greatness of your country, but nothing changes for them. Why? Because the system is still a settler colonial system. It's just now being governed by somebody from the region. And then eventually, after that, some military leader, like Gaddafi, comes in, overthrows the place, and starts actually governing for the benefit of the people. And then all of a sudden the CIA needs to show up and liberate the place. Didn't need to liberate when the king took over, but needs to liberate when this guy takes over. Got it. And it's like it's like a paint by numbers now. It's like literally you can just like predict it, and it's what happened. Because it's a predictable phenomenon. Because that's settler colonialism. That's what they did. And and so France is in this like really weird position where, like, if all of a sudden, like, if Burkina Faso actually secures its independence and actually stops sending resources to France, and if other nations start to take hold of that idea, and if that becomes the common thing, like, I don't know what France is going to do. Like, I just don't know what France is going to do. Yeah, I've put something up here. It's an Elon Musk tweet. Every single time Elon Musk mentions communism, we have to respond to it here on the Canadian Commie. Kamala is quite literally a communist. She wants not merely equal opportunity, but equal outcomes. Like, this is a response to another tweet done by As the World Burns. Kamala Harris is a communist, and her word choices give it away. Equitable distribution, equity. It's a repackaged version of Karl Marx's popularized slogan, from each according to his ability to each according to his needs, meaning a redistribution of wealth. Like, this is how dead-brained the conversation has gotten, that even liberalism, right? The idea of liberalism, the idea of a liberal, is to say the system itself is fundamentally fine. It's fine to have private owners. It's fine to have the banks be privatized. All of this is fine. But we do think that we have a incentive to govern, right? Not simply to say, let's make rich people richer, but also to say to the people that we ostensibly govern, hey, we're actually going to govern, and we're actually going to look to the concerns that you have, and we're actually going to do that. And the way that we're going to do that is through small-scale piecemeal reformism, right? That piecemeal reformism, the idea that we'll give you 0.25 over 50 years improvement in one category of your life, is liberalism. And things have gotten so hysterically far to the right, things have gotten so hysterically ridiculous and absurdist that that far-right people, like neo-Nazi adjacent people like Elon Musk, are looking at her and saying, she wants to do liberalism? That's communism. Like, that's how embarrassing this has gotten. CH writes, the existence of the CIA nullifies any claim of electoral fairness by the U.S. anywhere. If U.S. states can position the election as already rigged by the CIA, bribes, blackmail, threats, assassination, fraud, etc. CIA already did all of that before the U.S. announces a preference. And Elon is a joke, so is Twitter. I haven't looked at it in years. Fofakan writes, liberal, noun, reactionary revisionist. It's absolutely true, though. The revisionist claim is absolutely clear. I was actually like talking about, there is a piece of really brutal propaganda called Superman Red Sun. The whole pitch behind it is, what if Superman crash landed in Soviet Russia instead of in Kansas? What would that have looked like? And initially, when it began, I thought, oh, okay, maybe they are going to do like a reasonable, rational take on this, where they actually talk about, like, yeah, what does a Superman from the Soviet Union actually look like? But almost immediately, it revealed itself to be like, no, I wouldn't say it degraded to propaganda at the end. I would say that it revealed itself to be propagandistic drivel right away. And the major way that it revealed itself to be propagandistic drivel was by the elimination of the Nazis. A guy by the name of Dope Idiot 420 writes, I was born in the Soviet Union, and God bless, now it's completely dead thanks to capitalism. So what year were you born? Were you like born in 1989? Like, I've had people come in here and talk about how they were born in the Soviet Union, and then it turns out they were born like right at, like in the Gorbachev years. And then you start talking to these guys and they don't even know their own history, which is common. Yeah, they made Superman Gorbachev and made him capitalist loving. Well, a big thing that they did, they eliminated the Nazis. Yeah, 1988. Come on, dude. I was born in the Soviet Union, 1988. Gotcha, bud. The literally born like when the people who couped the government to end the Soviet Union were in power. Just like, yeah, I for sure represent the fullness of what the Soviet Union represents. Yep. I loved it when the capitalists came in and destroyed our economy and child prostitution came back. That was great. The yeah, Superman Red Sun, they eliminated the Nazis, which to me should be a crime. Like, that's a Goebbels level crime, if you ask me. You're making a piece of historical fiction, and you're literally removing from that piece of historical fiction the primary antagonist of who the piece is fundamentally about. Like, the thesis of your piece is, what if Superman was a communist? What if Superman was a Soviet? Right? Well, who are the primary antagonists of the Soviets? What helps explain most of how the Soviets acted on the lead up to World War II and then the denouement of World War II? Who do you think was involved in that process? What force do you think existed that maybe had something to do with how the Soviets acted? Oh, do you think it was the Nazis? Do you think the Nazis maybe had something to do with it? Right? And they just eliminated it. Just straight up, not a thing, not a force. They don't even mention Europe. Just Germany, it doesn't exist. None of that exists. Like, fundamentally, the piece is about America versus Russia. It's very Cold War focused. And they really display... What I find so interesting about that piece is that Lex Luthor is obviously a psychopath. Like, very obviously meant to be a psychopath. But the piece is basically says, sure, he's a psychopath, but we need psychopaths, right? Like, it's a very liberal position to hold. That, like, our psychopaths are good. And then, of course, Superman's evil is never actually really displayed, right? Like, Stalin's evil is literally, like, Superman finds an underground bunker covered in lead so he can't use his X-ray vision to find it. And the people working in this, like, death camp there, that's supposed to be the Gulag, obviously, aren't Nazis, right? Aren't criminals, but are just, like, innocent peasants. And in fact, one of them ends up being Superman's childhood friend. It's like the most cartoonish bullshit of your life. Just like, if somebody actually watched this and was convinced by it, it'd be like, you're the stupidest person I know. Like, what are you talking about? First of all, how costly would it be to build this lead shell to protect this death camp from Superman in the first place? And why didn't Superman notice it was being built? Like, it just was so dumb. Dumb would be the word that I would use. And extra dumb if anybody watches it and thinks that this has anything to do with the Soviet Union. Like, just clownish. Yeah, Conton writes, this dope idiot 420, born in 1988, only experienced the neoliberal shock therapy. Yeah, he doesn't even know how to be thankful the USSR doesn't exist anymore. Like, may as well be a modern-day high schooler from South Dakota. Yeah, essentially. Like, I think that modern-day Russia owes the Soviet Union a massive debt of gratitude. Like, the Soviet Union essentially pulls Russia out of agrarian feudalism, right? A rule under the Tsars, and the Tsars with their pogroms and pointless wars and literal death camps. The Soviet Union changes and modernizes the face of Russia, like, in huge and important ways. Like, so much of the current system of modernization that exists throughout Russia is because of the Soviet Union. And it has nothing to do with the capitalist neoliberal period. Like, neoliberals build nothing. Like, what have they built in Russia? Name one project that the neoliberals have actually built in Russia. What, Kentucky Fried Chicken, I guess? You got a McDonald's, I suppose? Your entire subway system was built during the Soviet period. Most of your cities were built during the Soviet period. Most of the laws that have any egalitarianism in it at all are because of the Soviet Union. Like, the idea that it's neoliberal capitalists that came in and saved the Soviet, fucking what? What are you even talking about? Like, what are you even talking about? It's just daddy worship. Yeah, CH writes, we haven't had hard asses writing graphic novels since, like, Alan Moore, V for Vendetta. We're living through Watchmen right now, basically with all the false flags. Well, yeah, like, they're never going to let artists actually do art. Like, that's not actually a real thing that's going to happen. Like, the best you're ever getting right now is something like The Boys. But even The Boys treats the CIA as, like, a benevolent and good force, right? That the point of The Boys is that there's this corporation, and the corporation's gone rogue, and the corporation's the problem, and Homelander's a problem. Yeah, that's a problem. But the United States government and the CIA, good. Certainly not terrorist organizations. Isaac writes, Roosevelt once said, Somoza may be a son of a bitch, but he's our son of a bitch. Yeah. Yep. XD writes, The Boys literally promoting the CIA and the New York City cops. Yep. It's pretty classic stuff, right? Like, all The Boys is really exploring is, like, what would a superhero really, like, what would somebody like Superman really look like? Like, what would that actually look like for real? Which is kind of like, Alan Moore did that shit. And, like, it's not a new thing to be done. It's just that I think The Boys is, like, the first time, like, Homelander is explicitly a Nazi, right? Like, in Alan Moore's writing, the Superman character usually ends up being aloof, detached, doesn't really care about the outcomes of what's going on Earth at all. And whereas The Boys is like, no, this guy's a Nazi. Like, he has a real, like, supremacist fetish. He wants to take over. In that way, he's kind of more like Magneto. Magneto has this idea that mutants are the new super race and they're going to take over. So it's like, Nazism, essentially. Whereas Professor X, his position is integration, coexistence. And it's like more the Martin Luther King line, right? So it's just like CH writes Trump equals Homelander, JD Vance the deep, right down to the dolphin fetish. But the Democrats are the other chick the boys tear apart, the head exploders. Like the but like the conversation isn't really genuine ever with superhero movies, right? Like superhero stuff is never actually genuine because superheroes never actually confront the political class. Superheroes never actually confront the ruling class of the country, right? Like the fundamental nature of superheroes, even in The Boys, which is like a kind of a scathing indictment of the concept of superheroes as a figure, but even they uphold the idea that superheroes exist in stasis. Superheroes are fundamentally reactionary, like structurally reactionary. Even the benevolent ones like Superman. Superman is supposed to be the Boy Scout. He's supposed to be the good guy, right? Well, Superman has no projects. Superman has no idea of how to advance the society. Superman doesn't even work to do so, right? He essentially is an icon for the system as it is. That the S might as well stand for status quo, right? And the only time Superman becomes activated, and the only time Superman actually says it's time to become part of the world, is in order to protect the status quo and any threat from the that happens to the status quo. The clumsier examples of this are like Galactus, World Eater, I'm here to destroy the planet, like just like obvious, like the world is at stake kind of apocalypse bullshit that has become so common that it's trivial, like it doesn't matter anymore. But then once that conflict is resolved, the superhero goes back to stasis, never confronting the political class. If he even meets the political class, he's to receive a medal and shake his hand and essentially endorse the political system that exists. And and as our system has fallen into decay, as the system has fallen deeper and deeper into decay, the more rational the villains sound. That the villain will stand up and air legitimate grievances and point at legitimate problems that are legitimately happening in the society. And so writers have had to make villains just objectively stupid and insane. I've talked about this before, but I think the worst version of this that you can see is in Christopher Nolan's third Batman movie, where like Bane, like I was watching the third Batman movie and the whole time I was like, I'm with you, Bane. Like I was rooting for Bane the entire time. Bane was like showing up. He's like, the city of Gotham. The city of Gotham has become corrupted by an inert political class that has forgotten the reason for his governance. We, the people, will take over Gotham and govern on our own behalf. And I was like, yeah, preach, Queen. Like, preach. Like, please tell me more about how you will overthrow this inept, pathetic ruling system that is completely corrupted to its core and needs to be gutted and overthrown. Yeah, I'm with you, Bane. Let's go. Right? And then, like, halfway through the movie, maybe 2/3 of the way through the movie, he's like, oh, by the way, I've put a nuclear bomb in the middle of Gotham City, and it will go off at a random... I'm like, what? Why? Like, why? You were totally winning, my man. Like, you did everything you wanted to do. You did your whole stated agenda. You achieved it. You wanted to have a revolution with the support of the people of Gotham. You galvanized the people against the corrupted system. You even trapped the New York City Police Department in the sewer system, which is stupid. It's actually stupid. Like, I remember watching that in theater and being like, wait, so they just sent all the police underground simultaneously all at once, and then they got trapped there because they sealed off, like Bane sealed off the one exit, and sewer, like manhole covers don't exist. Like the police can't just get out of all of these other exits that 100% definitely exist. This is stupid. But this is what writers have to do now in order to justify superheroes, is they have to make their stories stupid, because superheroes are actually very stupid. Their very existence is only justified based on the concept that our society as it is, the status quo nature of our society, is actually good. That Superman is actually saving something. That the force that's coming, the force of change that is coming to the society, is a legitimate villain. But in a society that is itself legitimately villainous, like we're a demonic, evil, psychopathic, narcissistic death cult, for sure, like objectively speaking, like every historian in history will describe us this way, because that's obviously what we are. That maybe only the Romans will actually one-up us in regards to our depravity, because the Romans were literally like crucifying people in public. So like we're one step down from the Romans, but like we're doing like a climate change apocalypse that the Romans could never even dream of. So we got that going for us. And so in a society that is obviously villainous, that has obviously washed its hands of sanity, that has obviously given up the game, that is obviously not interested in helping anybody, that is a death cult and has designed itself to be a death cult on purpose, superheroes are the villains. They absolutely are, because they exist to maintain the status quo. And if the status quo is evil, well, then they are evil. And that means that villains, the only legitimate villain that they can fight, and while maintaining their position of moral superiority, has to be just objective lunacy and an objective lunatic. And of course, the problem with that is that you have figures like Batman, for example. So Batman is such a low-level superhero that he has to fight low-level criminals. Somebody like the Joker, right? And because because Batman's existence exists to defend the status quo, well, the only person he can beat up and have everybody go like, yeah, that's good, is a lunatic. But then you think about it for 30 seconds and you're like, oh, wait a minute. Bruce Wayne could just fund mental health services, and a guy like the Joker would probably just be in an asylum somewhere, right? He'd probably just be getting medicated, right? That if Wayne Enterprises just gave a couple $1 billion, a single bat jet, right? Instead of building a bat jet, he gave that money to like a mental health services and created like the Bruce Wayne Asylum for the mentally disabled or something. Then there goes your Joker problem, right? And so not only do these superheroes become like villainous in their own right, they become like twisted and psychotic in what they have to do to avoid solving the actual problems, right? Like Superman could literally go to Donald Trump's house and just be like, "Hey, you're gonna make sure that poverty doesn't exist in this country anymore." And if Donald Trump was like, Superman would vaporize him, and then he'd look at the other guy and be like, we understand one another? And the other guy would be like, yep. And that'd be the end of that conversation. Like, but Superman's not going to do that. Why? Because Superman needs to uphold the status quo. And the status quo is evil, and so Superman must be evil. And in this kind of perverted, perverse logic, that somehow makes Superman good, that he doesn't go to the Hitler-level threats and just go, zzz. Like, what are you even talking about? So all like this whole superhero culture and this whole brain-dead Marvel way of thinking about the world has poisoned us. It's completely poisoned us, so that we have this cartoon version of reality where we can't actually look at figures of history and actually say, who was this guy? What world did he live in? What was his goals or objectives? What did he do? How did he act? What were his decisions? No, he has to be a cartoon villain. Is he Magneto or is he Professor X? That's the level that we're at. Nilo writes, superhero is a bit redundant considering hero means demigod. I know, dude. Welcome to America, baby. Most countries only have one dictatorship, but America, in its usual flamboyant style, decided it needed to have two. CH writes, yet the comics were actually gutted by the comic code. The nuanced moral tales like horror comics were banned. Yep. Like, I mean, the comics... I actually remember reading or watching a documentary about the comics code when I was, like, 19. And I immediately was like, how is this not Goebbels-level propaganda and, like, censorship? Like, how is this anything but that? Like, that's exactly what this is. This is literally, like, a comics code. It's like a organization coming in and dictating what you can and cannot say based on censorship laws. It's insane. Mad Magazine kind of kept that social commentary going. EC turned into Mad? I don't know what EC stands for. Okay. Let's turn to a couple... I'm just going to do like the quick headlines, because none of this is going to be surprising for you guys, right? For my regular listeners at home, do I really need to read a full article that says new report says 1 in 4 Canadians may be living in poverty? No. You know. I've read this article 40 times. How many times do we need to see this before we start to recognize that our political leadership isn't interested in it? Right? That we're not actually led by people who give a fuck at all. They're either completely demented or they're just total cowards, right? So at this stage in the game, like, is there any reason to put your energy towards anything but revolutionary power and revolutionary energy? Is there any reason to do anything other than galvanize people against this system that generates these outcomes, right? And of course, it's all too easy for people in our country to get galvanized against immigrants. Like, it's so simple to do. They just keep doing it, right? And all you got to do is be like, yeah, 1 in 4 Canadians may be living in poverty because those immigrants keep coming here and taking our jobs. And that's it. That's all you got to do. And so the whole conversation becomes about how, like, no, immigrants aren't coming to take your fucking jobs. Like, you live under a system of capital that, and the second you say, like, hey, did you notice how the capitalists, well, capitalism is the greatest system in the world. Capitalism is the greatest, maybe it has its problems, but it's the greatest system ever. And if you don't think so, then it makes you a dirty communist because Stalin was just as bad as Hitler and you're just as bad as Hitler. I know that because the CIA said so. That the very people who are keeping people in poverty said so. So that's what I believe. I'm a free thinker. Dope Idiot writes, am I from Canada? The name of the channel is The Canadian Commie. I have a Canadian flag right there. Dope Idiot 420. Do you smoke marijuana? Are you smoking marijuana right now, bro? Joe writes, there is no worthwhile direction than that of revolutionary. Yeah. And, like, eventually the society is going to get into this revolutionary position and into this revolutionary fervor. And they're going to be looking for the professional revolutionaries. And they're going to be looking for people who can't, like, the reason why Lenin takes power and Trotsky takes power and Stalin take power and the Bolsheviks take power is because the workers of Russia were willing to do the revolution. They were willing to do the initial thrust of the revolution, but after the initial thrust of the revolution happens, which is discarding the Tsars, right? There is a lot of conversation about who actually rules this place, who actually governs now. And the workers don't really know who. And so there is a jostling that happens between the Bolsheviks and the Mensheviks. And there is this initial idea that it should be the intellectuals, the liberals, basically, of Russia. And, of course, the Bolsheviks oppose this. And as time goes forward, the populace sides with the Bolsheviks. Dope Idiot writes, yes, of course, man. The time is 4:20 a.m. Marcus, good to see you, my man. Good to see you. And so Lenin is able to take power not because of he did like this big chess move thrust, but because he was a lighthouse on the hill. He was consistent in his views, outspoken in his views. Everybody understood what he stood for. He didn't change his perspective. He was passionate. He was strong-willed. He knew he had a strong theoretical perspective of how to move the country forward. And so when the fog of war and when the fog of revolution falls, Lenin and the Bolsheviks were a lighthouse for people to find in the fog. And that's what we need to set up. We need to set up lighthouses in the fog so that as people are radicalized and move towards revolution as a serious and legitimate thing that must be happening, that they can find lighthouses in the fog. And that's what we're up to. And that's what we're doing. Yeah. Exactly why we need the vanguard. Yeah. Comics, CH writes, DC just kind of goes full on silly, unlike the 1970s. Marvel writes soap operas until the 80s. Only in the 80s do we get published comics with any actual political relevance, mostly not superheroes. Communists did great animation, actually. Yeah, comics not so much, but very good animators with politically loaded material. Yeah, I mean, there's a reason why the McCarthy era needs to happen. There's a reason why people get blacklisted for their political views. Like, the capitalists are extremely aware. They're extremely, extremely aware of the power of art and the power of theater and the power of performance. They're extremely aware of it. And so they need to kill artistry wherever it is. Marcus writes, how do we promote legitimacy for the Communist Party in Western capitalist society? I mean, I think the first thing that a Communist Party needs to do is at this stage in the game, the communists need to normalize themselves. Okay? Like that, to me, it's not about convincing people that capitalism is wrong. Okay? It's not about being militantly aggressive in going after capitalists. Like, I don't like that popular quote unquote leftist or communist people are essentially just taking Ben Shapiro and then talking to Ben Shapiro, right? I guess it's good for content. I guess there are people that want to watch that happen. I'm not one of them. That what we need to be doing is we need to be promoting a line that shows people that communism is normal and how normal it actually is and how not unusual it is and how unstrange it actually is. And we need to show people flexibility and stability. Like, the thing, and I've talked about this a lot, and I'll continue talking about this a lot in communist... in my communist analysis of the West, the thing that's going to destroy communist movements faster than anything is if those communist movements fall into fundamentalism. Marcus says, you might disagree, but I think humans are naturally hierarchical and look for leaders within a movement. No, I tend to agree with you, Marcus, honestly. I do think that, like, people like leaders. I think that that's normal. I don't buy in really to the idea that like humans really do want like everybody, like there's a leader somewhere, right? Even if that leader is symbolic. I think people just want to be able to point to something and say that represents us. Like this is the apex. This is us. And I feel like that kind of does happen. Right? It just does happen. What the structure of your hierarchy is, and what the what the structure of your hierarchy is, or what the structure of your society is, will be reflected in that. Like the reason why all our leaders are psychopaths is because we live in a psychopath society that's structured to reward psychos. Like, so of course the leaders are psychopaths. The only way you can ascend to become the very top of this thing is by being a psychopath, because the system rewards it. But to return to sort of the criticisms that I have, or not the criticisms so much as like the goals, like any communist movement is going to have to really show its normalcy, its practical level-headedness, that its view is not radical, that the radical perspective is the capitalist perspective. Like, what's more radical than saying the productivity of the nation should be held by a single individual who does nothing with it? Like, can there be a more radical statement? Why is it that saying we should have clean water, clean air, clean food, why is this a radical position? Why is it a radical position to say that everybody should have health care? Why is this a radical leftist position all of a sudden? Like, why is it less radical to say that the finances of the nation should be held by private owners instead of the finances of the nation should be held by the people of that nation? Like, which one of those two statements do you think is more or less radical? And so the goal of communists moving forward is to de-radicalize communism, to make communism look appealing and rational, because it is appealing and it is rational, and then to combat the Western instinct towards fundamentalism. That, and I think both of these are equally important, that if it doesn't matter how hard you strive to make yourself appear normal and make yourself appear standard, if you're constantly hung up on this like fundamentalist worldview. And Western Marxists really have this. We've got like purity fetishes all up and down. We have a really huge purity fetish. And this purity fetish destroys movements. And so reliably that the CIA will infect your movement in order to trigger purges and splits because of purity fetishism, right? And like, sure, there are red lines. Obviously, there are red lines for any organization and any group, but Western Marxists are looking for them, and they're constantly trying to find them. And even minor disagreements are reasons to purge and to reasons to split up, and like it's just ridiculous. It harkens to the splits that happen all the time within Christian churches, right? That Christian like if you get a fundamentalist worldview, if your worldview becomes fundamentalist, then the stakes are always the end of the world. Always. Like, these Bibles should be red. These Bibles should be blue. Divide the party. Okay. Well, the difference between Mao and Deng, like, is a good one to point out within this purity fetish conversation. And really at the center of most fundamentalist worldviews is the iconification of a leader, right? That Mao is a good one to talk about in this, because you see it a lot with Maoists. You don't see it that much with Dengists, because Dengists kind of understand why Deng did what he did, whereas Maoists don't. right? Like, Maoists hold a fundamentalist worldview and say that the Chinese should have fought to the very last Chinese person in a war to the death against Western powers, rather that it's better to live in ash, or it's better to die in glory than it is to live subservient to a Western capital. I don't think that's a very serious position to hold, right? But if you're a religious fundamentalist, right, or if you're a fundamentalist, I shouldn't say religious fundamentalist, but if you're a fundamentalist, then that can sound like a legitimate position. It sounds like a position that can be taken seriously, because you're not actually being serious, right? Like, it's all well and good for some 18-year-old, like, guy from Minnesota to say, the Chinese should have fought to the death. Okay, champ. Like, you say that about the Chinese, okay? The serious analysts will think to themselves, how do we end this war? How do we do what's best for our country while simultaneously avoiding the worst possible outcomes and looking to the future of our country, right? And that's the dangest line, basically. And even the hearkening of, like, the moment you elevate a political leader into the position of an ist, right? If you're a Maoist and you define yourself through the lens of Mao, right? Which, it's fine to read Mao and learn from Mao and do everything you want with Mao. But the moment you define yourself as a Maoist, that you are Mao's guy and you will go to the mat always in defense of Mao, then you're fundamentally saying, my scientific socialist worldview, my historical materialist analysis ends with Mao. That I'm willing to do a scientific socialist historical scientific analysis, materialist analysis of everything, maybe even including myself, but the moment it's Mao, it's over. Mao becomes deified, and you can no longer analyze him accurately or correctly. No, we got a guy named Master Sheikh speaking in Russian, and Dope Idiot speaking back. So I can't respond to you guys if you speak in Russian, just so you know. Good to see you guys. I have Russians come in all the time. And, like, and so if the goal is for us to actually be invested in the material analysis and the historical analysis of what's happening right now to solve people's problems currently right now, but you're trapped in this fundamentalist view of a person who is dead, long time ago, then you don't sound sane. You don't sound like a normal person. Like, you sound very detached. People can't relate to you, right? Especially if they start pointing out things about your ist or your ism that is like, hey, what? Like, I'll give you one that I've always thought about Mao, for example. Like, and don't get me wrong, mad respect for Mao, okay? But, like, he did a campaign after the formation of the PRC. One of the first things that he did was a campaign of let 100 flowers bloom, is what they called it. And the whole idea of the campaign was everybody is supposed to stand up and air their concerns. And it's supposed to be a moment of cultural catharsis, a moment where everybody tells the truth and reconciliation, right? Did you get your feelings hurt? Do you feel badly? Do you think maybe the policies that we're enacting are not good? What do you guys think? And so people did, right, in this campaign. And very swiftly Mao ended it and then punished a whole bunch of people for the things that they said. And it's like, okay, like, not the greatest, not the best look, Mao, right? Like, maybe if you're going to launch a campaign of, hey, let's all talk the truth. Let's all speak our truth about it. Maybe coming down on people, it's a bit disingenuous. Feels like entrapment. Feels like you played a game in order to get people. So, but if you're a Maoist, right, then that's legitimate, and that's completely fine. Like, and you can sort of justify weird oddball decisions, and ignore very weird oddball stuff, right? Like, these leaders sometimes are weird oddballs, man. Like, sometimes they're very strange weirdos, right? Like they're not always normal people, because it takes people who are willing to be on the fringes to be willing to do this stuff, right? It takes dedication. And so I understand why there is this sort of proclivity towards fundamentalism, but nothing is going to kill movements faster. I can't think of anything faster. Marcus writes, how do you build the lighthouses? My biggest concern is devolving into fascism if the fall of the West clings to the wrong movements. Marcus, I mean, sections of the United States are 100% going to collapse into fascism, and I don't think there's anything that could be done about it. Like, if your foot was infected with a terminal cancer that was going up your leg, you got to get rid of that foot. You just got to cut that off, right? And so I think being honest and being legitimate, the way you build the lighthouse is by finding people around you and straight up having regular contact with them and having regular meetings and creating strategies for what's going on in your own environment, in your own community. Like, I can't give you the advice because I don't know where you live, and I don't know what the concerns of your neighborhood are, and I don't know who the people around you are. But I can tell you that if you're not actually connecting with other like-minded people in order to purposefully create an anti-capitalist position for people to come to and organize around, then it's never going to happen, right? That's how these things are built, right? And it's not going to happen today. Like, you're not going to start it and it's going to happen today. But I highly recommend, like, read the biography of Lenin. I'm reading a great biography right now that's actually written by Trotskyists. It's called In Defense of Lenin. And it's really, really obvious to me that these guys were like just a ragtag group of dudes who really believed in what they were doing, essentially just printing a newspaper, just constantly like printing a newspaper, just being like putting it out there. And then when the revolution happens, right, and they aren't the ones that enact the revolution. Lenin's not even in the country when the revolution happens. He was literally, I believe he was in Switzerland or Sweden. Anyway, he was not in Russia, and he was writing about he thought the revolution was never going to happen. It might happen in a couple of lifetimes. He never believed, and then literally 2 weeks later, the revolution happened. He's coming back to Russia as the people in his party are trying to cobble together coalitions and try to make sense of what's going on. Like, Stalin is there. Trotsky's also not in Russia at this time. Trotsky's coming in. Stalin is there, putting things together and being like, yeah, I guess the Mensheviks, come on in. The liberals, sure, yeah. We'll create a space and we'll have like a parliament and we'll have this kind of thing and maybe we'll do okay. And like the negotiations that are happening at this time, just the chaos of it, the absolute nightmare chaos of it. And then Lenin lands in. The Bolsheviks hold a meeting amongst themselves, and Lenin gives a powerhouse speech that just completely shakes the whole thing and creates the vision for the Bolsheviks moving forward. And they get rid of the Mensheviks, and they get rid of the Social Democrats, and they get rid of this, and they stand tall. And then there's like a civil war that happens, and there's all this crisis that happens. And the reason why the revolutionary workers are willing to look at the Bolsheviks and say, you guys actually should be the leaders, is because they stand by their principles. They know what they're talking about. When they say something's likely going to happen, that turns out to be the thing that does happen. They continue building trust. And the entire time, all they've actually functionally done from the position of what action do you take is talk to workers and publish a newspaper. Like, that's all they ever did. Master Shakes writes, I live in a country after the USSR, Russia, you could be. Anyway, as far as I know, the USSR is a shortage, queues, closed borders, censorship. Yeah, the leaders right after Stalin died were heavily incentivized to bullshit about the USSR. Right? Like, Khrushchev gave a speech that is completely torn apart by Grover Furr in a book called Khrushchev Lied. Khrushchev, amongst other leaders in the USSR, are heavily motivated to bullshit about Stalin and the Soviet Union and the USSR generally, which the West is eagerly awaiting to slop up because they've been reading Trotsky shitting on Stalin for the whole time too. And so there's like, after Stalin's death, there's like this very perverse narrative that comes out about him and about the USSR generally. And like, don't get me wrong, like, I'm sure that during World War II, when the Nazis were blowing up buildings, there were shortages. I'm sure that during World War II, and a little after World War II, dare I may say, as the Nazis blew up buildings and destroyed crops and murdered people en masse, 20 million Russian citizens dying in that war, I'm sure that there were queues, right? I'm sure. And I'm sure the Soviets closed borders during that period of time when they were worried about the Nazis invading them, right? I'm absolutely sure about this. And I'm absolutely positive that there was censorship throughout the Soviet Union as the Nazis tried to spread Nazi propaganda throughout the Soviet Union. Like, I don't take this line very seriously. You understand? Like, there's this real nasty, brutal proclivity amongst modern day liberals who try to pretend like communism wasn't deeply effective to eliminate from the history of the USSR the existence of the Nazis. It's a very perverse, strange, and unusual thing to see happen, and that the systems that were put in place in order to defend Russia against this heavily industrialized Nazi force, yeah, it likely reverberates for a little period of time, right? There are likely echoes that last a little period of time, for sure. Like, but if your analysis of the USSR does not include the Nazis, then I don't really know how to take you seriously. Like, it's the most brutal omission I've ever seen in my life. Marcus writes, sound like a good read because I imagine there's more nuance given the lens and lack of worship. Yeah, I think they give Lenin a pretty good. My only complaint is that in classic Trotskyist standard kind of behavior, anytime they want to really pump Lenin up, they basically just quote Trotsky, and I'm like, there's got to be like a million different sources that you guys could be using right now. Like, you could for sure even be using Stalin, like, but they don't, obviously, because Stalin's a demon and Trotsky's the hero, and we're not actually going to do a serious analysis of Trotsky or Stalin for some reason. I'm reading a really good book now at the same time called it's Stalin: A Legacy of a Dark Legend, and that's a really good book. It's like It's so rare to find an author, and it's written by an Italian communist professor. And it's so rare to see somebody actually try to look at Stalin and be like, who was this guy? Like, what is this guy's perspective? Like, it's pretty unlikely that Khrushchev told the truth about him. Master Shake writes, Stalin is trash because of his repressions. A huge number of people died. When did that happen? Like, what are you talking about specifically? Like, are you talking about the kulaks? Like, are you talking about the Civil War? Like, I don't really know what you're talking about. People who praise him are effing, and I'm sure you have some kind of deplorable thing to say about a guy that you probably don't know anything about. Yeah, it's easy to demonize Stalin. Of course it's easy to demonize Stalin. Like, Stalin was dealing with an enormous crisis. Just like a massive, massive, massive crisis. And it doesn't help that, like, one of Stalin's political rivals like would write like these enormous essays and enormous tracts about how Stalin was a piece of shit. And it doesn't help that like huge Western institutions gobbled that shit up. Right? There's been like a lot of internalization of that, where like, I don't know why I'm supposed to take the primary antagonist of a guy's word for it. You know what I mean? Like, sure, I'll listen. Like, I'll see what he has to say. But the more I learn about what happened between Trotsky and Stalin, the more I see that there were two major lines that worked against Trotsky. Line number one is that he ended up on politically the wrong side of the situation. There was the question of nationalism versus internationalism. And the people went with the nationalist line. They didn't go with the internationalist line, which Trotsky basically represented after the death of Lenin. And then on top of that, Trotsky wasn't really the greatest guy to organize with. There's all kinds of reports of him, like, he'd be reading during meetings. He'd literally say, like, this meeting is beneath me, that kind of thing. Like, I think that he just fell out of favor, and he just ended up on the outside of the party. And then there is a third thing that really makes me quite skeptical of a guy like Trotsky, which is the Bolsheviks and the Mensheviks. Like, the lead up of the revolution, there was always an accusation of he betrayed the revolution. This person betrayed the revolution. That person betrayed the revolution. This person betrayed the revolution. You're betraying the revolution. Like, it was like a trope, basically. And so when Trotsky gets pushed out, him saying of Stalin that he betrayed the revolution is like not special, right? It's like the least special thing that these guys say of each other. They like said it to each other constantly. And Lenin said it of people. So like, it's just like another, it's like, I don't like what you said, therefore you betrayed the revolution. It's not really serious analysis. Stalin v. Trotsky was tragic. There was no comparable conflict in China. The conflict between Mao and Deng could have gone that way, but it's pretty obvious that Mao and Deng understood one another and that Deng loved Mao. I think that was a big one. And that Mao, I think, came to see Deng's position, but wasn't willing to enact it. That's kind of how I look at it. Whereas Stalin and Trotsky, there's no love loss. I think that they did not like one another. Pretty plainly. Like, you listen to some of the things that Trotsky says about Stalin, and it's like pretty obvious that Trotsky is just upset, right? And like some of the shit that he's using as an insult, I found very, like, Trotsky would write of Stalin, he never overcame his rural upbringing. And I'm from rural Manitoba, and I read Trotsky write that, and I go like, hey, motherfucker, what's that mean? What's that mean? What's it mean to not overcome your rural upbringing? What's that? What about my rural upbringing do you find so deplorable? What's that about? So it just sort of smacks of like a very elitist, aloof, detached person who I think understandably loses a political conflict because people don't like him. It's just sort of odd that this guy has become the ism for the Soviets. Yeah. I just got a couple of Russians in my chat just trying to talk shit about Stalin, but they clearly don't know anything about Stalin. That's the funniest thing, right? Like, it's just when these guys, like, you should know something about these your leaders, right? Like, you should know something about your own leadership and your own past. Like, you keep saying, like, Stalin killed a whole bunch of people. Okay, when? Like, what year? When did it happen? What circumstance? What were the conditions? Right? Like, it's just sort of odd that you guys can't actually talk about this stuff. And yet you seem dead convinced of yourselves. Like, that's what makes it so unusual. That's what makes it so strange. I see this all the time. People come in here all the time, and they're dead convinced on their position. That they're literally in here arrogantly proclaiming their supremacy. And the second I push back, not even harshly, I'm literally like, when? What year? At what time? What was the name of the event? What are you talking about? They totally collapse. Like, it's just a total collapse. And that's just basically what I'm seeing here. Only this time it's more embarrassing because you guys say you're from Russia. It's like, so you don't even know your own history. Like, you don't even know anything about these guys. You don't even know what year. You're just literally peddling a line that Khrushchev gave you and that Gorbachev gave you. And you've never actually thought to yourself, are these guys morons? Like, who is this Stalin guy actually? Like, you don't know anything. That's what's so shocking. Like, that's what's been the most shocking part about doing this. Right? The most shocking part about doing this is talking to people who are so confident in their position, who are illiterate and don't know anything. Like, where does your confidence come from? What makes you think you know anything about the subject when you obviously don't? Like, I'm not actually being rhetorical about this. I'm actually asking. Why are you so confident in your position? What gives you this confidence? You don't know anything about these people. You don't know anything about this history. You don't know anything about the subject. And yet you're dead convinced. And so I'm asking you, why? Where does this confidence come from? Buck, good to see you, by the way, in Twitch. Yeah, they aren't actual Russians. They're from a CIA vat. Yeah. I mean, that's always possible, right? I definitely talked to a guy on Reddit maybe 3 or 4 days ago. It was a little while ago. And it was about the Uyghur genocide. And it really got really obvious that this guy was CIA because his arguments just got, like, he was just using sources and finding sources that no normal person would have. It was just so, like, it became obvious. I'm just like, oh, okay. I see what's going on here. And, like, I shouldn't say most of Reddit, but something like 24% of Reddit is now just CIA. The number one user of Reddit comes from, like, a fort in the United States somewhere. This dope idiot guy says, well named, I suppose. He says something in Russian, and then Bach, who is one of our Russians in the chat, says, "You are an idiot. There is a newsreel where he speaks to the public. You're dumb." Is this guy trying to make the claim that Stalin never actually spoke to the public? Like, that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about this Khrushchev brain, right? That's the kind of shit that Khrushchev would say. Like, just dumb. Just obvious, easy to falsify nonsense. Yeah, Uyghur genocide is itself a CIA term, like conspiracy theory, yeah. Marcus writes, Stalin lifted their grandmother out of abject poverty and established their city of thin air only to demonize his record. Yeah. I mean, after the death of Stalin, it was basically in everybody's interests to do so. That's just the hard truth. Like, everybody just agreed. Like, the new leadership of Russia, they benefited from disparaging Stalin's legacy. The West benefits from disparaging Stalin's legacy. Like, there's almost no one. And by the time Khrushchev ascends to power, even the Chinese are somewhat incentivized to not, they don't shit on Stalin, but they don't rise to his defense, because of the way things sort of worked out, what with the Sino-Soviet split and so on and so forth. And so So everybody has had this incentive to completely dogpile on Stalin and to dogpile on his legacy. And it has this real, like, Stalin defeated Nazis, and they'll never forgive us for it kind of vibe. Anyway. Well, guys, we've hit the 9 o'clock. We did it. We've had yet another one. A lively conversation and a lively debate as always. Glad to see each and every one of you. Always remember, each and every one of you is a quantum being, walking around in quantum energy. These billionaires are spending hundreds of billions of dollars in the hopes you'll never realize it. You'll just stay the good little commodity they need you to be. Rebel. Revolt. Repent. Good luck. We're going to need it.